I've had foes of the show, and they may still be saying these things on social media in a very bizarre move. One in particular, foe of the show, uh, blocked me, even though they constantly talk about me. So it takes away the ability for, me to even see what their commentary about the show is, which makes no rational sense to me whatsoever. However, this particular individual has said many times that they firmly believe that I am shadow running the state of Minnesota, as if I have that much power. And I think part of the narrative too of the job move was, yes, the individuals, the powers that be who disagree with John's commentary could no longer handle the fact that he was shadow running everything. So they had to try to do something about it. And yet a good man cannot be put down. I bring all this up because first off, it's a ridiculous notion, obviously, right? I can like I've always said, because I've talked about this before. I can barely control things in my own household, let alone shadow run a state or a government. That being said, some of my public commentary seems to be manifesting in various ways. I mentioned yesterday prior to and I'll go ahead and say what it was now. We were all having a discussion after the show, and it is the John Justice Show presented by American Experiment. Glad you're with us this morning. My name is John Justice. We have Devin producing the show once again today, and we'll go through all of the different ways that you can watch it and listen. But of course, you've already joined us this morning, so you're ahead of the curve. So we were having a conversation, sort of the comms group is what we call ourselves. I'm part of the communications group here at American Experiment, and this was on primary day. And I was talking about how, I wonder if President Donald Trump will go and toss out another social media post promoting individuals to go vote for Mike Lindell. And I'm talking within a matter of like less than a minute. One of the other members of the comms team was like, "Oh, hey, look, Trump just posted on Truth Social to go out and vote for Mike Lindell." I bring this up because yesterday I played a clip from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt talking about the Democrat socialist takeover of the Democrat Party is something we'll be talking about a lot on today's show. And I made the comment of just what a fantastic job she does. She's one of the best White House communications directors that, in my recent, memory. And then I get done with the show and I see the headline, Caroline Leavitt will leave her role as the White House press secretary at the end of the month. Oh, and that makes me sad. Now, she's going to go focus on being a mom. She recently gave birth to her second baby in May. And apparently she's going to go and focus on that. Let's see here. Trump said our wonderful White House press secretary and one of the most trusted aides, Caroline Leavitt, will be departing her role at the end of the month so she can spend more time with her beautiful young children and family, a decision I totally understand and respect. If she does end up returning into the political sphere, I hope it's as a commentator and not running for office. And it's going to be, again, this is kind of a running theme that we'll dive into in this first hour of the show, but that is the blatant media manipulation going on. And you've got a couple of different converging forces here. You have this contraction, for lack of a better way to describe it, of media right now. Whether it is what I've talked about on the show within terrestrial radio, the layoffs taking place. I mentioned, what was it? I think it was on Monday, that in a former market that I worked at, one of the competing rock radio stations, when I was working in that market where I had friends and former bosses working, they unceremoniously last week fired their entire staff and went completely automated. Cumulus Radio, which is another very large radio company, not as large as iHeart, of course, but still a massive company. They just went through a massive round of layoffs. And there's something odd that I'm experiencing on a daily basis going through the prep for this show. And there's a Venn diagram of all of these different things that lead to what we're going to talk about today, and that is the amount of attention that these wackadoodle, for lack of a better name, these wackadoodle Democrats have been receiving by the media, and how I believe that a big reason why they've even been able to make gains within these elections is because of what I'm talking about. There's a desperation among media outlets to cover the most sensational aspects, and it inflates and creates this level of attention, and that turns into votes. So I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but getting back to Caroline Leavitt, this is where I believe that we need more voices within public commentary, social media. We need those politicians out there. Obviously, we need conservatives running for office, stalwart conservatives, but it's equally as important to make sure that there are good, rational, intelligent voices out there within the conservative news sphere to counter what's happening within our mainstream media, what's happening within the publications of these left-leaning outlets that, again, I believe has been contributing to the rise of this Democrat socialism across the country. Let me share a few thoughts, though, regarding Caroline Leavitt. I have two different clips that I want to play for you. First off, from the White House administration, Stephen Miller was asked about this yesterday on Fox News of Caroline Leavitt stepping down from her post. These are his heartfelt words yesterday.
Personal for me, because Caroline is not just a colleague, not just someone for whom I have endless respect and admiration, but she's a close friend, someone I've got to know well, someone that my family has gotten to know well, someone that has really been in every way a source of joy in so many of our lives. Professionally, her credentials, her accolades, her achievements are second to none. Her job that she has performed as White House press secretary, the word exemplary doesn't even begin to cover it. She has served this president so well, this administration so well, this country so well, and very importantly, she's been a role model to millions and millions of young women all across this country, a mother, a family woman, a press secretary, a patriot, really in every way an extraordinary person whose role in this movement and this country is only beginning, and I see unlimited success and possibilities ahead for her, and we're going to continue working together every single day. Her story is just beginning. I can't wait to see what her future holds.
Yeah, and listen, it cannot be, I don't want to gloss over the fact that she's incredibly young. I mean, she's in her early 20s. So he's right. It's smart for her. I mean, it's smart's not the right word. I completely respect and agree with her desire to go and spend time with her family. I imagine that the job of being the White House press secretary is very daunting and time consuming. So a tremendous amount of respect for her for prioritizing her family and her life. But make no mistake, Stephen Miller's right. If she decides to return to politics, she will be a conservative voice to be reckoned with. Scott Jennings on CNN yesterday also shared his thoughts on Caroline Leavitt's departure.
Caroline Leavitt has been maybe the greatest White House press secretary in the last 30 years, at least. She's been nothing short of brilliant. She's done it while raising a young family. I think it's great that she's going to go spend time with her family, but I don't know a single Republican in the country who isn't in awe of and in appreciation of Caroline tonight. So Godspeed on your journey back to your family. You've done great.
Yeah. And just a fan, and, speaking of great commentators, Scott Jennings certainly falls into that category. All right. Remember, you can watch the John Justice Show at MN Think Tank on X, also Facebook and YouTube at Center of the American Experiment, and my personal Facebook and YouTube pages, John J-O-N Justice. And if you miss any portion of the show, because I know all your lives are busy and you can't listen to every single minute live. See, if I had that kind of manipulation and power, that's what I would do. I would force people to listen. That's right. I'd be your talk show dictator. I'm just kidding. You can get caught up on the podcast on the MixLR app where you can listen live. And that really is, if you're listening to just the audio feed, you can go to AmericanExperiment.org. But I encourage everybody to download the free MixLR app where you can listen to the show live. And also, the podcasts are available there, post to show, and across all podcasting platforms. Of course, you can email the show at any point. 24 hours a day, and certainly while we're live, john.justice at AmericanExperiment.org. And we have something called the Blaster Line where you leave us blasts. Blasts are your comments based off what we're talking about on the show. Your opportunity to let your voice be heard by leaving us a blast at 612-584-4565. Again, that's 612-584-4565. Let's go and hear from Gary.
Good morning, John.
I'm sorry.
I'm just
Joseph.
wondering, these songs that you're doing, is Max Reimer create them? Are you doing them yourself now? Or is somebody helping you? Because they're really, really good. Have a great show, hopefully.
No, so those are the latest rounds. So before the show starts at 6 a.m., for those that caught on the stream early, typically what I'm doing is I have a couple of groups of the AI Overlords, the John Justice Show house band. Some older songs, parodies. I'm getting my hands on some of the parodies from the previous show. We'll have them back on the show very, very soon. But also some newer ones. The newer ones that you heard in the run-up to today's show, those are the ones that I made. I was looking for... I hadn't messed with the song generator, the AI song generator, at much. So the other morning, I sat down, and as I was going through prep, I decided to try to create a few songs based off the stories that we were talking about on the show, and that was the result. So yeah, I'll be doing more of those. They're fun. They don't have any business being as good as they are. Devin and I were talking about it before the show when they started. I go, man, these songs are really, really good. So, again, it's the AI Overlords. And yes, I've been the one who's been creating them as of late. All right, before we dive into the media manipulation, I have a story about how David Crowley, who ended up beating out Francesca Hong for the Democrat domination in the gubernatorial race in Wisconsin, as I talked about yesterday, and this story from the Daily Wire is the perfect example. It's the lesser of two evils. You know, he may not be sort of the lunatic Hong hating on Thanksgiving and other holidays and lamenting her children being half white. But this dude is really no better when you get into the background and his past statements, especially regarding his belief of systemic racism. So we're going to dive into that also. And again, it's media manipulation, and it's manipulating the media, because Minneapolis man-baby mayor Mom Jeans Jacob Frey, he unveiled the Minneapolis budget for the coming years, and he did it intentionally on the day after the primary so that the story would get buried, because it is wild what the Minneapolis man-baby mayor Jacob Frey is proposing, because of the difficulties that once great city, is now facing under the oppressive thumb of the Democrat Socialists on the Minneapolis City Council. So we're going to get into this in just a moment. I want to spend just a few more moments, though, putting a bit of a bow on a brief conversation that I had yesterday right around this time. We were talking about John Justice Show sponsor NutraWave. Okay. As I've been mentioning, I lost 22 pounds on this amazing program. I'm doing another round of the program right now. I went through the first full round of about 40 days. I lost 22 pounds. And then I went back to my normal diet, but I did not put any weight back on, because of how this program changed my relationship with food, even though I was still eating the food that I wanted to eat. So I decided with a NutraWave, NutriWave.us, joining the show as one of our sponsors. And if you would like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to me, john.justice@americanexperiment.org. I'm doing a second round of this program. If you want to take advantage of it, by the way, 952-260-1965, 952-260-1965. Mention the keyword strike. And you're going to have the possibility of a $300 value, a truth metabolic scan, and a red light therapy session, absolutely free, just for finding out about the program. There's no shots, there's no pills. Individual results may vary, but for just finding out what the program's all about, talking with Dr. Bob, who's one of the most amazing people that I have met, truly cares about taking care and the health of the individuals that go through his program. So just by finding out, you get a free gift. So again, 952-260-1965. No shots and no pills. And so I bring that up because I was talking yesterday about what's been happening within Hollywood And these actresses and some actors too. John Goodman showed this dramatic weight loss, although he was so overweight that he actually looks fit and healthy now. But I'm convinced he's using these GLP-1 shots. But there's been this swirling concern around actress Jenna Ortega, and I brought her up yesterday because she recently appeared in this Vanity Fair interview, and everybody is going, what's happened to Jenna Ortega? Because she looks sickly. It doesn't look healthy. I want to share this with you. Not Caroline Levitt, excuse me. Riley Gaines, defender of women in sports, biological women in sports. You're familiar with Riley Gaines. She has her own show now, the Riley Gaines Show, and she posted a clip talking about this very issue, and I wanted to share it with you this morning here on the John Justice Show, presented by American
Here's Jenna Ortega 2 years ago. Here's Jenna Ortega now. What is happening? I think this phenomena should be named the Ariana Grande effect. I generally don't like to comment on women's bodies because you don't know what someone's going through. Like Jenna Ortega, for all I know, could be battling some sort of illness. She's not said that, and I don't think that's the case, but I don't know. And I think what's healthy for some people might not be healthy for others. But here's what I do know. You should not be able to see your sternum through your skin. I say this entirely out of compassion and with concern, quite frankly, for Jenna Ortega. She doesn't look okay. She looks sick. She looks like the life has been sucked out of her. How she looks, where you can see her collarbones and like her shoulder caps, that's how elderly people look when they're sent to hospice to die. I've said it before on my show, and I'll say it again, I really think the skinny epidemic is just as harmful as the body positivity movement that was glorifying obesity. I think the health effects of malnutrition might actually be worse. It's bad for fertility, it's bad for your brain function, it's bad for your immune system. Of course, it causes muscle atrophy. And the worrying part is it's not just Jenna Ortega or Ariana Grande. Here's a picture of some celebrities at recent red carpets. It's becoming a trend. The skinny epidemic, I think, is more severe now than it was in like the early 2000s. I already know I'm gonna get crap about this video because I did when I made a video about Demi Moore and how severely sickly skinny she also looks. But I don't think we can let this go unchecked, unnoticed, and untalked about. Jenna Ortega was beautiful. She's still beautiful, but I hope she recognizes, if this is something that she can control, the long-term effects that malnutrition has on you. And to the girls who watch my page, or maybe you see the videos of other celebrities who have been Arianified, I just want to reinforce to you that strong is cool. Strong is healthy. Strong is functional. And when I'm at my strongest, I'm also at my most confident.
I don't want to read too much into this, but I want to add a little bit more to Riley Gaines' commentary. And certainly actresses in Hollywood getting scary thin is nothing new. There was I don't even know how long ago. I want to say early 2000s, but it may have even been earlier than that. But there was this heroin chic look, doing that thing with my fingers, that was popular for a short period of time. But these were all like the supermodels that were going to look like Jenna Ortega looks. Now, most of them were doing it because they were just basically starving themselves. And the GLP-1s kind of do that to you. But there is a very specific and distinct look to individuals who are taking this type of medication. And that's not to begrudge anybody that's taking these prescriptions at all if you're using it appropriately. But clearly, the individuals like Jenna Ortega and others are abusing it. But I also think this is a further extension of just something we're seeing in society. And that is just that obsession with one's self. Right? It's tragic. It's really tragic. It's an extension of the God-sized hole that so many people are attempting to fill, right? Where their looks become that important. They become that increasingly concerned with themselves that they feel like they have to be that thin. And it's just really sad to see. And it seems like, you had Anne Hathaway. I saw her recently. Charlize Theron. Of course, Ariana Grande is probably the one who had been getting the most attention, but Jenna Ortega doesn't look all that much better either. It's just a very fascinating and scary phenomenon taking place. And again, dovetailing off of my commentary yesterday, I found Riley Gaines's comments there incredibly interesting. And also another individual who has a very bright future ahead of her, much like Caroline Levitt. Of course, if you go and listen to the foes of the show, they have a completely different take on individuals like Caroline Levitt as they begin to slowly fall into their Trump derangement syndrome nonsense. Here on the John Justice Show, presented by American Experiment.
Hey, good morning. This is Eric from Brainerd. Stephen Miller is right. Carolyn Levitt was an inspiration to women everywhere. If you're blonde enough and dumb enough, you two girls could defend a pedophile president, defend Epstein and the biggest cover-up in American history with him hiding the documents, and the Iran war, which Trump started, most unpopular war, and stagflation and all that good stuff too. But she was an absolute disgrace in the position, and whoever they put in next is not going to be as good. So get ready to defend the Iran war a little more, boys. Have a great day, everyone.
Whoever they're going to put in is not going to be as good after he just spent, or she just spent 40 seconds going and trashing him. Like, I don't even want to retort because it's so ludicrous. It's got to be a bit, right? It has to be a bit. I know. People actually think that way. Trump derangement syndrome does that to people. I understand, but again, foes of the show just can't quit me. All right, coming up, we'll get back to more of your thoughts from the Blaster line, 612-584-4565. Democrats' moderate Wisconsin nominee has his own woke skeletons in the closet, including his past statements regarding the death of George Floyd, systemic racism in America. I'll share this with you coming up later on in the hour, too. More post-mortem on the primary results, including the polling and just how atrocious across the board the polling was relating to the primary. As a matter of fact, Frank Luntz, the famed pollster, he says that we should just stop polling altogether until we can figure out what is going wrong and why all of these polls have been so off base. I personally believe that it's part of the commentary that I shared with you at the top of the show, this media manipulation and how they are moving towards the most sensational of candidates and in sort of inadvertently or maybe intentionally inflating their support through that extended coverage. So we'll get to that coming up in just a moment on the show. Drop us a blast. You can email john.justice@americanexperiment.org. Speaking of polls, here's a few minutes of one of the other individuals who's involved in the comms team here at American Experiment, Bill Walsh, talking about some recent polls regarding the state of Minnesota here on the John Justice Show.
Is the Declaration of Independence worth celebrating? 66% of Minnesotans said yes. Woo! The Declaration of Independence worth celebrating. 4% said boycott. That's just 4% crank, in this poll. We can ignore that.
Gosh, this is shocking to me. It really is. When I picture all of the protesters that I see every weekend with their upside down American flags, the No Kings, and the signs cycle every few months because someone's making them for them and giving them their messages. Those people must be included somewhere in here, right? I don't know. That's incredible.
Is America generally a force for good in the world? And again, remember, this came out right before we bombed Iran. These numbers might be different today, but 54% thought America was a force for good in the world, 41% not a force for good, 5% unsure. So not a horrible result there. I think
41% say not a force for good. How do you think that?
Think about it. Minnesota has always been a low crime state. But according to the most recent Bureau of Criminal Apprehension data, we are now above the national average when it comes to Part 1 crimes, a category that includes crimes like murder, assault, rape, and carjackings. Think about it. Minnesota is now a high crime state. Visit highcrimemn.com to learn more. Think About It is brought to you by Center of the American Experiment, Minnesota's think tank.
Now, one of Keith Ellison's campaign donors has pleaded guilty to fraud. Now, shocking, I know. For what it's worth, became the last of a 7-member family group to plead guilty in the sprawling Feeding Our Future fraud scandal last week. Ikram Yusuf Mohammed, who once worked as a Feeding Our Future employee, but more excitingly was present at the infamous December 2021 meeting where Keith Ellison, our own Attorney General, met with some fraud-connected individuals. She was in that meeting. So a few days after that meeting took place back in December 2021, her brother, Gandhi, who just pled guilty last week, donated the maximum allowed amount to Keith Ellison's campaign. That was $2,500. But this is so interesting because Gandhi was not only being investigated for food fraud, and we've seen this with several fraudsters. Gandhi Muhammad received at least $36 million in Medicaid reimbursements, as well as the stuff that he was making off the free food fraud case. But he hasn't been charged with fraud in those programs yet. So were those ill-gotten gains?
Think about it. A famous politician once said, "You're entitled to your opinion, but you are not entitled to your own facts." But in a world full of AI and fake news, where can Minnesotans find the facts? Center of the American Experiment is Minnesota's go-to source for fact-based analysis and common sense solutions for taxes, energy, public safety, and our kids' education. Visit AmericanExperiment.org for more information. Think About It is brought to you by Center of the American Experiment, Minnesota's think tank.
Good morning, John. Eric, you need to take off your tinfoil hat. It's really messing with your brain. Have a good day.
But the problem is they have no desire to take off their tinfoil hat. They're fully embracing their level of Trump derangement syndrome and conspiracy. So I'm just here for the entertainment value when it comes to the foes of the show.
Good morning, John. Victor here. I have missed Eric from Brainerd. You know, she always has some pretty terrible points, but I just wanted to say it's always the liberal women that come out and try to tear down some powerful, strong, you know, smart women that are in the news every day. It's always the liberal women that come after them and try to tear them down.
Thank you for the comment, Victor and Brian. I appreciate it. We have more blasts to share coming up on the show. 612-584-4565. David Crowley, the Milwaukee County executive who pulled off the stunning upset over the summer's socialist surge, has blamed systemic racism for police shootings, opposed legislation to protect law enforcement, and declared Wisconsin the worst place in America to raise a black child. So, yeah. People are pleased that Francesca Hong was beat in that election, even though I do believe that she would be, it would be easier for Tom Tiffany, the gubernatorial candidate, the GOP gubernatorial candidate, to beat Hong. I also understand the argument that you don't want to let a radical individual like that get as close to being governor if you can avoid it. I mean, look what's happened here with Governor Dim Walz. I mean, he's no better or worse, or actually maybe even worse than Hong in a lot of respects with some of the ridiculousness that he said. But it's a lesser of two evils. David Crowley isn't all that much better. He's not a moderate Democrat by any stretch. So you go back to 2020, and he went all in on the BLM narrative surrounding the domestic disturbance call that ended with an officer-involved shooting of Jacob Blake. The then 29-year-old who had a felony warrant for his arrest was armed with a knife and was attempting to get in the driver's seat of an SUV when he was shot 7 times, triggering widespread unrest in Kenosha. This set the stage for the later acquittal of Kyle Rittenhouse, of course. Make no mistake, Blake's wounds are the result of systemic racism, the policies and practices that entangle our institutions and produce racially disparate outcomes, regardless of the intentions of the people who work with them. He made similar ridiculous comments relating to the death of George Floyd, saying that it was a public health emergency. Crowley, back in 2020, also celebrated former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick's national anthem protest, suggesting that professional sports should grind to a halt until the country achieved racial justice, when it's the Democrats who went and exacerbated intentionally the racism that exists here in the country. You're never going to get rid of racism. It's just part of sin. It's here. It's unfortunate, but it's a part of sinful nature. But we had reached a really good place, the best place that I had seen since following politics, going back to when former President Barack Obama was elected, even though he was a president and a nominee that I certainly didn't support. But Obama spent the majority of his time in office making race relations worse to the Democrats' advantage. And this is the example of that. Before the so-called Summer of Love in 2020, the Democrat gubernatorial nominee also opposed BLM legislation that would have added law enforcement officers to the state's hate crime protected category, saying the proposal only furthers the divide between urban communities and the people who serve them. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. But all of this now, this is the scary part. All of what I just laid out is no longer sensationalist enough to warrant coverage of concern. So who got more attention here? Well, Francesca Hong did. Well, why? Because she was saying a bunch of outrageous and stupid things. But so would David Crowley. But this has become mainstream now. Everything that he's mentioned here used to be in the category of the ridiculous commentary that Francesca Hung was able to achieve so much notoriety and left-wing coverage over. Like I mentioned, the lamenting the fact that her son is half white, the hating of holidays like Thanksgiving, the menstrual feast that I mentioned during yesterday's show. You see, that all gets a bunch of coverage because it's crazy. And the media knows, hey, this is going to get us a lot of views. These stories will get us a lot of clicks. And when it comes to David Crowley, you probably won't hear much of any of this, maybe on Fox News, but certainly not within your regular mainstream media, and certainly not in the way that they were covering Francesca Hong, because it's not sensationalist enough. And this is the point that I wanted to make on this. This is the media manipulation that I'm talking about. When we dive into the polls a little bit later on, there's all of this, well, why didn't the polls match up? El Sayed was supposed to win by this massive sweeping margin, and he eked out a victory. Francesca Hong was supposed to beat David Crowley handily, and she ended up losing to him by just a small margin. Well, why? Because I think there's a lot of inflated attention being given to these individuals. Yes, they're gaining support off of it, but the polls are reflective of the way that the media has been focusing on all these crazy people, wherein if they didn't, I don't think they would have nearly as much support. If you didn't have the media covering Francesca Hong's comments the way that they did, she would have lost by a much wider margin than she did. Now, and it's a double-edged sword here, because on the one hand, you want this coverage, you want this exposure, you want these individuals to be called out, because these are the types of people that will seek to destroy what America stands for and what's made this country great. But on the other end, you go, I don't think these people would be nearly as popular if they weren't gaining so much attention, because Trump derangement syndrome has convinced that broken and brainwashed base of Democrat voters to oppose that which is most extremely the opposite to President Donald Trump and conservatism. And that's who these people represent. I posted a social media video yesterday, and it was me commentating on this young green-haired dyed goblin, this young green-haired dyed goblin who was basically going off about how she believes that we need to stop Republicans from getting elected. She's in a nice house. You can see her apartment, but she's basically saying, hey, we need to make sure that we do everything we can to stop Republicans, because she said straight up, things are great when Democrats are in office, but when Republicans are in office, then everything turns to garbage, and we're now a third world country. She's not achieving that mentality. She's not getting to that conclusion on her own. She's hearing that from somebody else. She's hearing that from the media that she is consuming on a daily basis. When you see these white liberal women out there cheering to their own demise when these radical candidates end up winning these primaries, not realizing that if they were to get into power and they had the ability, they would absolutely strip away their rights. Well, why do they do that? They do that because they believe this is how they push back against Donald Trump to their own detriment. And they're being fed all this through the mainstream media. Now, let me get back to what I mentioned before, because I want to couple in the other aspect to this. So, as I mentioned, you've got this contraction, this shrinking, these layoffs when it comes to terrestrial radio. as I'm going through and doing my prep on a daily basis, suddenly now a bunch of the websites that I go to for content, they're now going up behind paywalls. I mean, the Star Tribune did this a while ago, right? And there are ways to kind of work around that to get the stories that you need without having to pay for it. But when you look at outlets like The Blaze and Daily Wire, you know, they're throwing a bunch of their content up behind paywalls, right? They have to in order to, you know, maintain their business structure. But it's becoming increasingly more difficult to get at relevant information, truthful, fact-based information, because these different companies are having difficulty surviving. I bring that up because not to get into the economics of it all, right? But to show that, yeah, there are fewer and fewer conservative voices out there and fewer means of which people can go and receive that information. So people end up funneling to those free outlets. And on the left, it's the left-wing media. It's really unfortunate, but there is this cycle right now wherein sensationalism is driving so many of these stories, so many of these candidates, and in my view, it's artificially going and attributing to their popularity and sometimes bringing about electoral victories as well. John.Justice at AmericanExperiment.org. And if you want to leave a blast, 612-584-4565. Again, that's 612-584-4565.
Hey, John, Brandon Cottage Grove. So yesterday, all I saw, people being outraged all over the internet, all over every social, about how the primaries turned out. Everyone needs to wrap their heads around, this is just the start. Let's get the strong bunch of candidates in, make some changes so more people will jump on board on the next election cycle. If your candidate wasn't put in this time around, push them through to the next time. This isn't hard to figure out. Everyone needs to calm down, back to GOP primaries that were elected, and just get them in. I don't know, man. I really hope we figure this out. Have a great day.
Yeah, I'm not. I agree with your commentary, Brandon, and thank you so much for the blast. I'm going to let the dust settle on all this until I, begin to form an opinion of where the mind of the GOP voters is right now in the wake of the results of the primary. We kind of got to let the dust settle. And this includes, some of these candidates out there that are still contesting the results of the election and some of those voters out there that are doing the same thing. And I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I hope that some of those losing GOP candidates from the primaries on Tuesday actually go and take a cue of what the Democrats are doing. Angie Craig calls on her supporters to go and back Peggy Flanagan in her concession speech. Here's what she had to say.
In that spirit, I just called the Lieutenant Governor to congratulate her on her hard-fought victory and to offer her my full and complete support going forward. I deeply admire Peggy's commitment to Minnesota and her dedication to improving the lives of everyone around her. Peggy's story is one of grit, of determination, and resolve. The election was a choice between two women, and it's a great damn day to see women running even against each other.
That's what needs to happen on the GOP side of things. Can you imagine that for just a moment? Some of these losing candidates, Senate, gubernatorial, standing up there and making comments like that relating to Michelle Tafoya, relating to Lisa Damuth. Going back to what Brandon was talking about, that's what needs to happen. Unfortunately, that's not the world that we live in right now. 612-584-4565. Again, 612-584-4565. We have some more blasts that have rolled in to the blaster line this morning here on the John Justice Show, presented by American Experiment.
Oh, my goodness, Eric from Brainerd. She is still living in the past. You're still talking about the Epstein files, and that's the problem with the left. They live in the past, and they cannot get themselves motivated to the future. There's nothing you can do about the past, people, except make it better for the future. And the left has no idea how to do that.
Thank you, Richard. Always great to hear from you. Let's go to this comment on the Blaster line this morning.
Hey, John. Well, 250th anniversary of the United States. This year, first time in 92 years, they transferred suppressors without a Form 4. The NFA gets a kick in the nards. So, yeah, if you could get I'm just going to Minnesota gun owners on here and see if they have any commentary on it, how it might apply to people in Minnesota. That would be cool. Have a great day, John.
I am putting that on my list of things to go and tackle. So thank you for the suggestion. I hadn't seen that, so I'll go looking forward after today's show. Maybe something we can talk about on a Freedom Friday. All right, let's go to the city of Minneapolis, going from the media manipulation to the manipulating of the media, because that's exactly what Minneapolis man, baby mayor, mom jeans, Jacob Frey attempted to do when he laid out his budget proposal earlier this week. So the man, baby mayor proposed an 11.3 property tax levy hike to address the $60 million budget shortfall, which includes a $30 million revenue shortfall and increased costs for the police department. The proposal includes job cuts across departments, including the police department, and aims to address the city's financial challenges while maintaining essential services, and as the city council will finalize the budget at the end of December. So he threw this in right in the middle of the whole primary process to bury the story of what a disaster Minneapolis is facing right now. And on top of that, he took to social media to try to go and confuse the issue even more by bringing up a completely separate subject on top of all of this. You probably missed this story. It was part of the headlines yesterday, but it was already buried within our local media because of the primary results. And when I went to do prep today looking for this, it wasn't on any of the local media channels. And you get into the story, I pulled this from Axios. Years of generous salary increases and mounting inflationary pressures are beginning to overtake City Hall. The mayor's proposal will tee off the most painful budget fight in years, with some city council members likely to go to bat for pet programs and other members likely to push as hard for deeper cuts and a smaller levy hike. And again, you probably didn't hear anything about this because he intentionally went and released it in the midst of all the primary coverage, and then went and took to social media to talk about just a completely different topic altogether on exactly the same day, touting some new success within downtown Minneapolis.
So we are at a hotel opening. It's roaming at Century Plaza, and this is going to be beautiful. It's long-term stays. Look at this outdoor space with downtown right over here. I mean, this is going to be incredible. Another key investment that's happening in our city. We got council members here. We got community members here. Well, we've even got now Miss USA Galaxy over here. Been upgraded even. So this is where it's all at. Big investments coming to Minneapolis.
Yeah. Big investments coming to Minneapolis, guys, while they scramble to try to figure out how to fill their budget shortfall, which is absolutely massive. After the police department overshot its overtime budget last year, Minneapolis man, baby mayor, mom jeans, Jacob Frey's proposal for next year builds an additional $13.1 million up front for MPD overtime costs. And they only have to have MPD overtime costs because of the fact that they don't have enough police officers. And individuals like the Minneapolis mayor, Thief Ellison, Dim Walls, encouraged people to take to the streets to obstruct lawful law enforcement during the ICE operations, with just increased the amount of money that they had to go and give to law enforcement. And it's listed here in the story. The ICE surge and the other crisis increased the size of MPD's overtime run, but the MPD reliance on overtime is likely to persist until its depleted officer ranks fully rebound. And that's never going to happen with them, even though they're legally obligated to go and hire more cops. You have an increased pushback coming from those Democrat socialists on the Minneapolis City Council that's keeping that from happening. And as I demonstrated yesterday on the show in an article from the Minnesota Reformer, ICE arrested and deported more criminal illegal aliens in the month of July than since the start of all the ICE operations since Trump's beginning of his second term. You haven't heard about it because there hasn't been any concerted effort by Democrats to go and obstruct what they're doing. And more specifically, something I didn't mention on yesterday's show is that the argument that we heard from so many of the radical on-the-street insurrectionists was, we're protecting our community. This is happening to our neighbors. You haven't heard a single story from anybody complaining in any neighborhood or any business about ICE operations and the individuals that they've been arresting and deporting at a record level for exactly the same reason. It was all made up narratives. It was all false. As we talked about during Operation Metro Surge, when law enforcement goes into a community to arrest a bad guy, the neighbors around go, good, you're arresting that bad guy. The same thing rings true when it comes to illegal aliens. But yet, if you listen to those on-the-street insurrectionists, if you listen to Dim Walz, Thief Ellison, the Man Baby Mayor, they would have you believe that ICE is going in just ripping up communities, tearing down the fabric of neighborhoods. No, they're just going in and doing their job, like lawful law enforcement always does. And that's the prime example here, is the fact that you have all of these record arrests of illegal aliens, and you haven't heard anything about it until I brought it up on the show. And it was comical because the Minnesota Reformer is a radically left-leaning organization, and I don't even think they realized what it was that they were exposing by going and covering that article. We have a further ICE update coming up after 7 o'clock, by the way. ICE is going to be using new shock gloves. They're pretty cool, actually. We'll give you details on it. And, of course, the backlash has already begun over these. And so we'll share that with you coming up after the top of the hour. Man Baby Mayor Mom Jeans Jacob Fry hopes to save money by folding the city's race and equity office into human resources, also by moving performance tracking and neighborhood outreach teams into other offices to curb the fire department's overtime spending. The city will spend $3.8 million to draw the federal grant funds to add 15 sworn officers who can cover the absences without overtime. And again, he used the election to blunt the backlash and then tried to go and change the subject. They're talking about an 11% tax hike in property taxes in Minneapolis. Can you even imagine? I mean, I guess you probably can if you live in Minneapolis, but an 11.3 property tax hike levy to address their $60 million budget. You know, at a bare minimum, if they were worth anything, the activist leadership, at a bare minimum, they would go and say, hey, we're going to cut all of our salaries. We're going to cut all of these pet things that we like. So we're going to do our part to make the necessary changes and cuts. Unfortunately, we're going to ask the community to do the same thing as well. But of course, they're not doing any of that. They're too busy focused on repealing laws relating to dens of debaucheries that allow for Isaac's Bathhouse Emporium in downtown Minneapolis. 612-584-4565. That's the number if you want to leave a comment. john.justice@americanexperiment.org. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about the polling, and I want to continue to get into this idea of why these polls were so far off. From landslides to nail biters, the great Midwest polling meltdown, and just a little more commentary regarding the primary results. I had many of you reaching out incredibly concerned over voter turnout, especially when it comes to the GOP. So I have an article from Alpha News that we'll be diving into. It addresses this. It addresses the endorsement process, and I want to talk a little bit further because it actually was a record-breaking turnout for the primary, even though there was a disparity in the number of Democrats versus Republicans who came out to vote. I have my own thoughts of why that is the case, but I can tell you up front that I spoke with individuals who have been covering politics much longer than I have here in Minnesota, and they were unfazed by any of this. They were unfazed by the low voter turnout. This has been going on for years. It's not something that should be ignored. We need to increase in voter turnout. Republicans need to increase in voter turnout, but it's not a five-alarm fire at this point in time, and I'll explain coming up. But I would like to hear your thoughts on why you think there was a low GOP turnout in the midst of a record turnout. total voters. And that includes a record number of Republican voters that came out. It just wasn't nearly as many as a Democrat. So we'll get to your thoughts to 612-584-4565 coming up on the John Justice Show, presented by American Experiment.
What's that thing that Keith Ellison said in the December 2021 meeting with fraudsters? Money is freedom. Money is power. Yeah, right? I mean, that's happening in Minnesota, and you don't just see it with public sector unions generally, but especially, I mean, look at the teachers union. It is like cartel levels of control that they hold over the DFL here in Minnesota. So even if there were some DFL legislators who, say, wanted school choice and thought it was a great policy, the teachers union is so against it and so against any meaningful reform that they really can't come out and support it because they're being funded, their campaigns are being run by the union.
Think about it. Now that school's out for the summer, how are Minnesota students doing? Not very well. Minnesota ACT scores fell again last year and are the lowest they've been in 10 years. In fact, fewer than half of Minnesota students can either read or do math at grade level. Think about it. We used to brag about our schools. Now we're losing to states like Mississippi. Visit AmericanExperiment.org for more information. Think About It is brought to you by Center of the American Experiment, Minnesota's think tank.
Minnesota is the second most generous state in the nation, spending $46,000 on public welfare per person in poverty in 2023. Second most generous.
Just really quick, if those people in poverty had the $46,000, they wouldn't be in poverty.
So I just would like to quickly point out
that the government is once again like the least efficient organization in the world.
Think about it. Minnesota has always been a low crime state. But according to the most recent Bureau of Criminal Apprehension data, we are now above the national average when it comes to Part 1 crimes, a category that includes crimes like murder, assault, rape, and carjackings. Think about it. Minnesota is now a high crime state. Visit highcrimemn.com to learn more. Think About It is brought to you by Center of the American Experiment, Minnesota's think tank. Think about it. A famous politician once said, "You're entitled to your opinion, but you are not entitled to your own facts." But in a world full of AI and fake news, where can Minnesotans find the facts? Center of the American Experiment is Minnesota's go-to source for fact-based analysis and common sense solutions for taxes, energy, public safety, and our kids' education. Visit AmericanExperiment.org for more information. Think About It is brought to you by Center of the American Experiment, Minnesota's think tank.
It's the John Justice Show, presented by American Experiment and AmericanExperiment.org. Remember, you can watch at MN Think Tank and head on over to AmericanExperiment.org as we've been talking about the media's influence and the fact that a lot of conservative voices and publications out there are finding it increasingly difficult to continue their operations without throwing their product up behind a paywall. There's an opportunity that we've tapped into here to continue to provide for you commentary completely free. You can watch on Facebook. You can watch on YouTube, Center of the American Experiment. Listen at AmericanExperiment.org and the MixLR app. But support the efforts of what we're doing here by going to AmericanExperiment.org. Click the link right there on the homepage. There's a pop-up. Head on over to my page. Make a donation to American Experiment. You can pick up a embroidered John Justice Show hat. I was a proud papa yesterday. My son Kyle went to go see The Odyssey with his buddy. He enjoyed it. He said it was good. He's such his father's son, though. He came in and immediately was like, it's pretty easy to go and push aside all the wokeness in the film. He knows the Odyssey story backwards and forwards, so he knew all the different nuances and changes. But he's a lot like me, where he's able to shove aside the stuff that would ruin the film for a lot of other people, including my wife, to go and enjoy it. But he was wearing a John Justice Show hat. So that was pretty cool. As a matter of fact, a shout out to some other friends of the show who live in our neighborhood as well. I was out walking Artemis the other day, and I'm walking past their driveway, and the couple were sitting there just enjoying a cup of coffee outside. The weather was great, and he was wearing a John Justice Show hat. That was a weird experience. I go, it's odd to be walking out in public and seeing somebody wearing my hat. So if you want to get yourself one, head on over to AmericanExperiment.org and make a donation by going to my page. Got a comment that came into the blaster line, 612-584-4565, regarding Angie Craig fully throwing her support behind DFL candidate Petty Flanagan.
Hey, good morning, John. Paul from Brooklyn Park. So Angie Craig getting right on the Flanagan train, that's very machine-like. Angie knows she doesn't have a job coming up here pretty soon. She knows if Amy gets the job, then maybe Amy will put her into that Senate slot, and everything will be good. They'll both all be senators and, governors and whatever. I think Republicans are just really frustrated. It's hard to lose because you can see what they're doing to our state. It's really hard to just get back in line. I don't know. I'm not sure how it's all is going to work out. I hope it's for the best.
Well, I pray for the best as well. And thank you for the comment. 612-584-4565. So from the Daily Wire, I actually have two stories here, one from Newsmax and one from Daily Wire. A pair of high-profile Democrat primaries in the Midwest were supposed to be runaway victories for far-left candidates, including... according to the bloated survey numbers. Instead, election night delivered a pair of nail-biting finishes and exposed the pollsters as being completely out to lunch. Wisconsin, Democrat Socialists, as we mentioned, Hong was supposed to waltz to the governor's nomination. Pundits spent months hyperventilating over the double-digit dominance. Poll after poll showed Hong lapping the field. A late PPP poll showed her up by 18 points, while Marquette, the polling firm, had her leading by an eye-popping 22 points. Yet when voters actually showed up, the supposed landslide vanished into thin air. The Democrat Senate primary, hard left Abdul El Sayed, was projected to crush rival Representative Haley Stevens. The Emerson poll had El Sayed ahead by 15. Mitchell Research had him up by 14. Data Progress up by 13. When the final tallies came in, the landslide turned out to be a mud fight. He barely managed to cross the finish line, eking out a razor-thin 1% victory over Stevens. While both contests ended with outcomes vastly different than the promised hype, one trend is clear. If you're looking for accurate predictions, you'd probably have better luck asking a crystal ball than reading the latest poll. And here in Minnesota, the same thing rang true when you look at the results of the polling when it came to the Senate race between Flanagan and Craig. That wasn't nearly as close as they had predicted. When you look at the GOP side, yes, you had Michelle Tafoya up quite a bit, and that seemed to ring true. But when you looked at the numbers, when it came to Adam Schwarzy and Royce White, Royce was supposed to be up with Adam Schwarzy's numbers. I think he came in at like 21%, made it respectable, while Royce came in at 11%. That was completely off what the KSTP polling was supposed to show. Pollster Frank Luntz believes that political pollsters should acknowledge their inaccuracies, especially with low voter turnout. He argues that projections are unreliable when turnout is low, as seen in the Wisconsin governor's race. Luntz, who was wrong about Hillary Clinton's 2016 victory, emphasized that polling is an art, not a science, and urges caution in conclusions. This whole polling issue, by the way, you can go and attach to the entire social media phenomenon because people understand how this works now. They know that when they're being polled, those polling numbers are going to be impactful. It's not just information that you're giving to a media outlet. They're talking about information being given to a polling firm that they know is going to end up at a media outlet that they don't trust anymore. And they also know the power of those polls. So you're not going to be able to get an accurate assessment any longer when it comes to polling the potential voters, because a lot of them just simply aren't being honest. And on top of that, you remove the media attention, which drives the brainwashed, hair dye brigade that I was talking about earlier, the white, angry, liberal woman who don't think for themselves, right? The self-proclaimed socialist communists end up winning in the end because they're being fed these individuals that they're seeing over and over again. They are being criticized by Republicans, and therefore they end up believing, oh, I need to support that person because the GOP hates them. And because the GOP hates them, I must now go and love them, to their own demise and detriment. Luntz went on to say, I'm calling for a total and complete shutdown of primary polling in the Midwestern United States until we can figure out what the hell is going on. Luntz told the news outlet, Newsmax, that he was among the pollsters in 2016 that went all in on Hillary Clinton winning the presidency. I believe that Hillary Clinton was going to win based on the exit polling of all the networks. And that's another problem, too. It's like, I don't think we should bring back exit polling, but we don't do exit polling anymore. So now you have even further media manipulation within these polls, because they don't have any other relevant, tangible data to go and point to. And even if you did continue to do exit polling, because of what I mentioned before, I don't trust the voters to be honest about who they went and voted for. He says, and so I put out a prediction that said, what makes you not understand the words of President Hillary Clinton? I got it wrong because I believed the numbers. Luntz said that people who realize political polling need to who release political polling need to stand up and admit that this is not a science. It is an art. And that you need to be much more careful about what you say and how you conclude. This happened before, and it will happen again until pollsters start talking. And then on top of this, not that I want to get into all of that, now you also have the betting markets now, which people are putting a lot of stock in. And why wouldn't they? Because it turns out often that the betting markets end up being more accurate than the polls are. And the reason why the betting markets end up being more accurate than the polls are is because individuals who are driving those betting markets, they're paying closer attention. They are more honest in their assessment of who they think is going to win. And when they start shifting their money around, you know this if you follow sports betting at all, when they start shifting their money around, they're looking at actual tangible data. They're not going off of feelings. They're not going off of emotions. They've got, a dog in this fight. It's their money. So it ends up that those betting, those betting polls end up being a heck of a lot more accurate in the end than the actual polls are. And it's hour 2 here on the John Justice Show, presented by American Experiment, AmericanExperiment.org, where you can listen to the show. Also on the MixLR app, just like it sounds, MixLR. Download it. It's completely free. You can listen to the show completely free, and you can get caught up on the podcast there right in the app. Also, you can listen to the podcast after the show is over on all podcast platforms. Watch the show live at the MN Think Tank on X, also YouTube and Facebook at Center of the American Experiment, and my personal Facebook and YouTube pages as well. We'll continue to take your comments via the Blaster line this morning at 612-584-4565. Again, that's 612-584-4565.
John, great job of covering this polling information. It should be a good reminder to all Republicans. But the only thing that matters is when you get to the poll. And I would say to those who are applying purity tests to our Republican candidates, if you think they're not a better option than the Democrats, well, and then great words of Mr. Foreman from that 70s show, you're just a dumbass.
I had a email that came in from friend of the show, Raquel, asking why they stopped doing the exit polling. First off, the exit polling was turning out to be wrong. And that was certainly the case when it came to the presidential race between Trump and Hillary Clinton. There was also this concern that the exit polling was influencing individuals who had not gone to the polls yet. This was how the media was able to go and call races in previous elections leading up to 2016, because they were getting a gauge of the exit polling. They would get the first returns, and then based off of what they were being told from the individuals who went and voted, they were extrapolating, hey, this person is going to win, and we know this because X amount of people that we talked to leaving the polling place said, hey, we voted for this person. Slowly over the years, people stopped being as honest with those exit polling, and then you get to that election and the polls were completely wrong. The media outlets ended up looking like a bunch of fools, and so because of that, they ended up ditching the exit polling. So that is the short version of why they went and ditched the exit polling. All right, we'll get back to more of your comments here coming up in just a moment on the show. Top takeaways as we continue our post-mortem on the primary. Top takeaways from Minnesota State primary elections. So over 1.1 million people voted in the state primary. With those votes, Minnesotans nominated, of course, Republicans and Democrats for governor, U.S. Senate, other offices, setting the stage for the fall election. So here are the top takeaways from Alpha News, and I agree with these. The first one was the Minnesota Republican Party endorsement is dead. It's deader than dead. It's dead. For decades, the Minnesota GOP gathered before the state primary election to endorse candidates for statewide office. Those Republican-endorsed candidates had gone on to win their party's nomination in election year after election year. In fact, every GOP-endorsed candidate for governor in the U.S. Senate has ended up winning their party's nomination. For more than 2 decades, this has been going on. The last time a Republican governor or Senate candidate lost the endorsement but won the nomination was 1994. In fact, the Minnesota DFL endorses their candidates for statewide office, but the DFL primary voters have often rejected the DFL endorsed candidates for the primary. In 2010, Dayton lost the DFL gubernatorial endorsement, but won the primary. Dim Walz did the same thing in 2018. In recent years, however, the endorsement process has faced criticism for giving a small number of party delegates too much influence, and many Republicans and Democrats have expressed the desire to do away with the endorsements and simply have a primary. In this year's primary, the Republican primary voters explicitly rejected the GOP-endorsed candidates and may have ushered in the end of the endorsement process. Only Tad Jude, who sought the GOP nomination for Secretary of State, was endorsed by the Minnesota GOP and went on to win his primary. Ron Schutz, the GOP-endorsed candidate for Attorney General, also won his primary but was running unopposed. What happened here is very similar to the commentary that I've been providing in the first hour of the show. So in years prior, when the endorsed candidates would go on year after year to win their party's nomination, what was the difference back then compared to now? Well, we didn't have, in further times past, you didn't have the internet, but you certainly didn't have social media. You certainly didn't have the ability that we all have now to go and receive an abundance of information at a moment's notice instantly. To the point where this thing called fear of missing out has grabbed hold of the cultural zeitgeist. And so you have more people now than ever who are able to go and find out about a candidate for themselves. They can see their commentary. They have more places to go and watch debates or interviews across multiple platforms, shows like this, other shows. So you have a more informed electorate of individuals who can get the information where in years past they couldn't, where in this delegate process was a little bit more relevant. Let me back up. Not a little bit more relevant. It was a lot more relevant because these were individuals on the ground that were really paying attention. These were individuals who were following these candidates, who were watching what it was they were doing and what they were saying at these various events, whereas other individuals didn't have the time to go and research these people. So you trusted the delegates to go and make your choice for them. Well, guess what? It's not the case anymore. I've advocated for the fact that I think that we should just go and nuke debates at this point in time. What is the purpose of a debate anymore? Why bother? We know the stances of the candidates. Yes, it provides the opportunity to put two candidates up on stage and compare and contrast. I get that. I think there is still value in that. But at the end of the day, are you walking away with any new information? Are you walking out of a debate suddenly going, I'm going to go vote for that candidate, even though I came in wanting to vote for that candidate? If there are people that are doing that, it's not enough to go and sway an election by any stretch. So the whole purpose of the endorsement process and having these delegates, and no offense to these delegates, they do a great job. But there's no reason why an average individual, there's no reason that a Devin or anybody else listening right now can't go and find out exactly the same information that that delegate is finding out. And yet that delegate is going and making the decisions. And because of that, you end up with more shenanigans taking place during the convention because there is this attempt to go and game the system because of everything that I just mentioned. If you want to leave a comment on that, 612-584-4565. Again, 612-584-4565. We'll get back to more of your thoughts. As a matter of fact, let's go here because we're about to go and discuss the other takeaway, and that is the record turnout and the concern that you have over the fact that not nearly as many Republicans came out to vote in this primary as Democrats.
Good morning, John. I'm not worried about the primary GOP among the people voting because our bullpen is deep. We had 3 good candidates. I have my preference. I did vote in the primary for the first time ever, but all 3 can do a good job. So I think that's people just trust that.
Again, 612-584-4565 is the line if you want to leave a comment on the Blaster line to the point of why there weren't as many Republican voters out during this primary. Let's go and hear from friend of the show, Chad.
Hey, John. Chad. I just wanted to say I have not voted in a Republican primary since Fred Thompson. Good Lord, I don't even know how many years ago it was. But I remember how many of us showed up for Fred Thompson, how many of us wanted Fred Thompson, and how we were all told that none of our votes were going to count, and everybody in our precinct, everybody in the area changed the votes. And I think it was for McCain at the time. But I haven't done one since, and I will never do one. I'll vote Republican, but never anything else.
Thank you for the comment, Chad. Let's go and hear from Tom.
You know why there's always so many more Democrats than Republicans voting? Because all the Republicans are out working, making money for the Democrats to live without having to work. That's why.
So let me preface this by saying, as I get into some of the numbers here, I did, as I mentioned earlier, I talked with individuals who are who've been following Minnesota politics far longer than I have, and I immediately said, "Hey, were you listening?" They said, "Yeah, I was listening to the show this morning." The people concerned about the lack of GOP voters, and they just went, it happens every single cycle. There's always a disparity in the numbers, not putting a lot of stock in it. So that was about the extent of the conversation, but let me get into some further thoughts. And specifically, according to the Minnesota Secretary of State, Steve Simon, more than 1.1 million votes were cast in Tuesday's primary. It was the first time that more than 1 million votes had been cast in a primary. The previous was 925,544 votes back in 2018. Although Republicans saw a higher turnout this year compared to past cycles, DFLers still turned out to vote in greater numbers than Republicans during the primary. Clearly, more DFLers showed up to vote than Republicans, despite the competitive races on both sides. While a part of the enthusiasm gap can be explained by Minnesota's leftward lean, Republicans will need to close that gap if they want to win in November. And it's funny because the next line here is polls can't be trusted. That was the other takeaway from the primary election, even though we spent some time talking about that already. I think there's a lot of different reasons why. I think the previous Blaster comment was correct. At 612-584-4565. I think there is a level of individuals on the right that are out working. It's a small percentage. I don't know how much it would play into this, but it's partly the reason why. There's also another simple explanation. In part, why the turnout is lower for Republicans. And I'm going to go and attach this again to the commentary that I did last hour about media manipulation. It's awareness. It's media bias. It's money, and it's news consumption. If you watched any regular TV, you saw a ton of ads, but most of those ads was the fighting going on between, Angie Craig and Peggy Flanagan. There was a ton of money poured into that campaign. Don't misunderstand. There were also ads that were running for Mike Lindell and for Lisa Damath and for Kendall Qualls, but the majority of the focus within the Minnesota left-wing media has been on the Democrat race. A lot of Republicans, a lot of conservatives are not consuming left-wing media. They're not watching those local news outlets. They just don't trust the coverage anymore. And as I've mentioned so many times, not everybody listens to shows like this, even though I wish everybody did. So go and tell your friends. So there's that awareness part of it. And I think there's also a factor of what the other friend of the show had mentioned, and that is he doesn't even bother getting involved. A lot of Republicans just wait until the primary process is over despite the very real thing of the GOP's inability to go and coalesce around one particular candidate, there are a lot of individuals out there that go, you know what, whoever the GOP candidate is, I'll just wait until the general. And then you have that small, and I hope it's small this year, and then you have that small group of individuals who simply say, I'm not even going to take part in the process. We're just going to lose anyhow, so why should I bother? That factors into it too. Do we need to go and increase our voter turnout? Absolutely. It should be the focus of every single one of these candidates. It should be a focus of all of the different leaders within the districts here in Minnesota, and I know that it will be. There are hardworking individuals that are going to work tirelessly to go and increase the vote. And the turnout for the GOP more specifically. All that is to say, don't get discouraged over these numbers from the primary. A lot of people are. I know a lot of you reached out to john.justice@americanexperiment.org, but we've got time between now and November. We've got a great slate of candidates. I pray, as I've said already multiple times, that those losing and endorsed candidates go, and I believe Kendall Qualls did. I think Kendall Qualls yesterday put out a fantastic press release throwing his support to Lisa Damuth, and I hope that the other losing candidates go and do the same thing in their respective races. That would be most beneficial. If you're unwilling to do that, unfortunately, I'm of the opinion it's just because you're being selfish. It's not about you. It's about your own ego. It's about your own grift, and it's not actually about what's best for the people of Minnesota. If you want to do what's best for the people of Minnesota, you go and you get behind the candidate that ended up actually winning the nomination. That's how you do the best thing for the people of Minnesota. Speaking of manipulation and also fear, Star Tribune's got an article this morning. I couldn't eye roll hard enough at this headline. Minnesota Republicans put electability before Trump. That headline alone exposes the flawed logic of how the left views Trump supporters. I'll dive into this coming up. I want to take down some comments from the DFL candidate, Lamy Klobuchar, coming up. Also, I have audio. As a matter of fact, let me go ahead and play a bit of it here in a run-up to this, okay? I want to dive into this article. We're going to get back to more of your comments via the Blaster line at 612-584-4565. But let me share with you a bit of commentary coming from Nancy Mace. She has her own show now. She's posting up a commentary up on social media. And again, it's a good thing that you have individuals like Nancy Mace that are going and doing this because of what I mentioned. So many of these great conservative outlets are now going up behind paywalls, which is going to limit the ability of conservatives to hear great commentary, which is why they all need to come to this show. But Nancy Mace yesterday was talking about how the primary was a master class in the total collapse of common sense. And she focuses specifically and directly on Minnesota in her commentary, calling out Representative Ilhan Omar. Here is a bit of Nancy Mace and her commentary on the primary on the John Justice Show presented by American Experiment.
Last night was a masterclass in what the hell happened to common sense.
I am incredibly clear that the Somali community is part of the fabric of the state of Minnesota.
We're looking at the elections, of course, last night, the primaries across the country, and I've got to tell you, we might need to update the map. At this rate, at the rate that we're going, America's only going to have 49 states. Let's start with Minnesota. Last night in Minnesota, it didn't just lean left, it jumped off a cliff into a socialist abyss. And if we don't start building a wall around Minnesota, the radical rot is going to infect the entire republic. Let's look at the wreckage. Ilhan Omar won her primary again, not just by a little bit, but by a lot. And apparently the voters in Minnesota have a terminal case of the Stockholm Syndrome. They just reelected a woman who put Somalia first.
The first women to wear a hijab.
Trashes America and treats our tax dollars like a personal ATM for her radical agenda. Watch this.
You guys have the ability to make an impact on where our nation is headed, not only here in the United States, but even in our nation back home.
In our nation back home, which of course is Somalia.
If you love the Ayatollah and hate the USA, Ilhan is your girl. It's a disgrace that she even holds a U.S. passport, let alone a seat in Congress. But don't forget, it was Republicans and Democrats who stopped me from subpoenaing Ilhan and her brother husband's immigration records.
The remark is always, let the process play out, right? That's what they always say, and nothing never happens. I tried to subpoena her immigration records, her brother husband's immigration records, and it was Republicans that killed my motion.
Congress did that, both parties. And I can't seem to get a vote on a bill to ban the foreign-born from serving in Congress or as federal judges. Go figure. And it gets worse. Bernie Bro, Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, the Lieutenant Governor of looting, beat a moderate for the Senate nomination. Bernie Sanders backed her, which is the socialist version of a good housekeeping seal of approval. Flanagan is a radical, like absolute radical, who thinks safety is a microaggression and boundaries are bigoted.
I just watched the video of Donald Trump attacking the beautiful Somali community that calls Minnesota home.
Flanagan went to a Somali market, put on a hijab, and told the fraudulent Somali community, we've got your back.
We are going to stand shoulder to shoulder with our neighbors.
When I first saw her culturally appropriating a hijab, I thought it was AI. Apparently it's not. Look at this.
When I think of being part of Minnesota and growing up here, the Somali community has always been a part of my Minnesota.
But there's one hope, Michelle Lafoya. Michelle is a sports broadcaster who understands what a woman is. She's running to keep the progressive trash out of the Minnesota Senate. You want to save Minnesota for becoming a third world country from the new Communist Party. Vote for Michelle. Then there's Lisa DeMuth, who took the GOP spot. If elected, she'd become the first black female governor in the history of Minnesota. I was wrong to assume it would be front page news. Instead, they featured Amy Klobuchar, the liberal white woman, because, of course, the GOP pick is black. Can't have that. I guess DEI doesn't fit in the GOP. Now into my home state of South Carolina, where the establishment...
All right, we'll stop here. That was the extent of Nancy Mace and her coverage and thoughts, and a lot of accuracies there. And again, I'm the last person that should ever go and harp on anybody else for mispronouncing names, but holy cow, we need to give some of our congressional Republicans a cheat sheet. She got Ilhan, she got Demuth, and she got Klobuchar wrong in terms of her pronunciation. All right, I want to get to this article, but a lot of great comments have run into the blaster line based off of the commentary so far here on the John Justice Show presented by American Experiment. So we're going to dive into these in just a moment, including several of you have pushed back on my no more debates. And you're using one particular example as the reason why we need to have debates. I'll share it with you just a moment. I still don't think it's enough to continue to do debates. And I'm a talk show host. I'm generalizing. So we'll get to this in just a moment. Before we do, though, I just want to take a moment and let you know that I got an amazing sleep. I got amazing sleep last night. And you know why I got amazing sleep last night? Because of Mini Leaf and their night gummies. I cannot say enough good things about Mini Leaf, MINNELEAF.com, and all of their amazing products available at the website. If you struggle with your sleep at all, and that was certainly the case with me when it comes to the odd hours that I keep, the night gummies are and have been and continue to be the solution to me getting a good night's sleep. It's what helped me put together, along with the crew here at American Experiment, this show. It's what keeps me lively and awake during the entirety of the show. A good night's sleep is also one of the healthiest things that you can do for yourself. Head on over to MINNELEAF.com. Get yourself their night gummies today. Also, you can take advantage of their really effective Triple Diamond pain cream, their spooky Mini Leaf tonics. These are fantastic alternatives to your typical alcoholic beverages. Of course, they have the fun gummies there as well. But for me, it is the night gummies, right? Made from hemp, come in multiple flavors. The night strength gummies, absolutely the complete game changer. Taking one before I go to bed. They taste great. You drift blissfully off to sleep. You stay asleep throughout the night. And even if you get up multiple times a night, the great thing about them is once you get up and you get back into bed, you're out like that. Head on over to MINNELEAF.com. Again, that's MINNELEAF.com, and taste happy at MiniLeaf.com. Let's go back to the blaster line.
Yeah, John, Pat from Burnsville. Say, listen, I think you're off base on the no debate. Yeah, us people that listen to your show knew that Biden was a potato head. But until that debate, then the things that you're talking about today as far as media manipulation didn't come to light.
No, hey, listen, it's a great point. And it's a point that I've made. It was a frustrating thing to watch where all of us had seen, just how mentally declined that Joe Biden had become. But you're right. It wasn't until that debate to when it was completely exposed. So listen, we're not going to be getting rid of debates. Okay. I just think there's an argument to re-examine the value of debates and maybe which debates we go and do. Is it necessary to have these primary debates with a whole bunch of people up on stage? Everybody gets a little bit of time in a world where you have access to what the voters believe constantly, constantly. They're putting out content. I just think there's less value in them. Maybe you keep them at the national level. Maybe you decide on a case-by-case basis. So that's part of my argument. And on top of that, too, if we end up in a situation again, Joe Biden was an anomaly. Pray to the good Lord Almighty we never end up in that situation again here in the country, wherein you have somebody who was in such a fragile mental state as Joe Biden, who continued to run for presidency and for re-election. There's some value in debates, make no mistake. That being said, I just think in the world that we live in, their value has been diminishing throughout the years. And before you say it, yes, I also understand, too, that the Governor Tim Walz and J.D. Vance debate also had a level of importance there. So, all right, let's get back to some of your thoughts, including and specifically the election turnout numbers and why the GOP was lower than Democrats here in Minnesota.
Hey, good morning, John. Regarding the primary election turnout numbers, my wife and I are a couple to blame. We were just coming back into town very late from a long trip, didn't make our way to the poll. Her and I talked about even on the way into town, and we're like, do we make the effort? Do we, find some place to put the kids and swing into the election polling places? And we were both like, well, we'll just see what happens. So, yeah, we're kind of part of the problem. But for the midterms, we will be there to vote.
Well, thank you for your honesty this morning here on the John Justice Show. Apparently, it's all of the friends of the show's fault. Stuff happens, and I'm sure that happens for a lot of people. Let's go here.
Hi, John. I voted in the primary for the first time in my life, and I voted for Peggy Flanagan. I'm a conservative Republican, and I felt our best chance of winning was having her because she's beatable. I think this is why you saw more Democrats voting in the primary, because a lot of Republicans voted that way.
Okay, so I'm going to run through this round of blasts from the blaster line at 612-584-4565. I'm going to run through this round, but if you went and voted, well, I'll keep you anonymous. If you went and voted in the primary, but you voted on the Democrat ticket, I'm curious. I'm curious how many of you did that. I thought about this. We didn't have a concerted, at least not that I saw, a concerted Operation Chaos event going on. This goes back to Rush Limbaugh, where he had talked about doing this very thing with Operation Chaos. I was curious whether, even when we went to go vote, there was a moment when I got the ballot and I thought, really would rather have, Peggy Flanagan as the challenger to whomever ends up, getting the nomination for the GOP. But I didn't. So I do it again. It was a fleeting moment, and I don't know if I've never done that, by the way. Only because I feel like I'm lying and I don't want to lie. Nothing against you if you did, but I'd like to hear from you. If you ended up voting opposite of the party because you wanted to see a more beatable Democrat challenger, drop us a comment at 612-584-4565 or email me, john.justice@americanexperiment.org. Let's get back to some more of your thoughts from the blaster line this morning here on the show.
Hey, John, good morning. This is Barry. So,
Primary in June? Yes. Convention? No. Why do more Democrats hit the primary? This is their Christmas, Easter, and Thanksgiving all rolled into one. Telling a Democrat not to vote in the primary is like saying you can't go to Mass at Christmas. So they do that. And yes to debates, because Joe Biden was destroyed in the debate. That's what happened. We see ineptitude at a debate. We see non-polished at a debate. So keep the debate.
I think my debate take is going to be about as my no debate take is going to be about as bad as my desire to see the Super Bowl run on Saturday instead of Sunday. And even more so, having the Super Bowl run the first half with the halftime show ending on Sunday, and then the second half ending on Saturday night, and the second half airing on Sunday. Devin's just over there. It's the first time I've actually seen him shaking his head at me.
That's the worst idea you could have had.
I know that's really bad. The splitting up of the game is really bad. I still do say that they should run the Super Bowl on Saturday. It's dumb that we run it on Sunday. Give everybody the opportunity to party it up, enjoy the game, and not have to worry about going in sick on Monday morning.
Is there a possibility we can make it universal that Monday is like a holiday and everyone gets that off?
Or do that.
I see that line of thinking.
I would be on board with that. That to me would actually be a very patriotic thing. I mean, it's an institution. There's something incredibly patriotic about the Super Bowl. It is an institution. It's gotten woke over the years because the NFL has gotten woke over the years, but I do see your point. So maybe I should be a bigger advocate for make the Monday after the Super Bowl a holiday. Now, this is completely counter to next season because they're going to be running the first exhibition race for NASCAR on the Saturday before the Super Bowl. They're going back to returning to what they used to do, so I don't want my run it on Saturday night to come to fruition, and don't worry, it never is. You want to know why? Because I don't shadow run anything. I don't have that much power. Let's go back to the blaster line this morning.
The reason that there were so many more Democrat primary voters is because they tend to vote in advance with the early voting and dropping off all of those ballots. And also, there was a sighting of busloads of voters coming, so they get solicited and brought in to vote en masse.
Yep.
So that's my opinion. That's why.
I got an email, friend of the show, Julie, so I'll get on board with this. How about presidential and governors debates only? Yeah, I can handle that. That works. We'll go and we'll split the difference there. Let's hear from friend of the show, Wendy, on the blaster line at 612-584-4565.
Good morning, John. I was working as an election judge and had an encounter outside of the suburbs of Minneapolis from the Citizen Justice League, where some people came in dressed in Muslim attire trying to vote or vouch for somebody who didn't live in the area. And I was just wondering if anybody else had been reporting those types of instances that happened at their polling location.
Yes, I had actually heard that from several different individuals, and I saw a lot of anecdotal evidence of people commenting on that very thing on primary day. So thank you for the blast.
The purpose of polls is to create a narrative for the audience, and they have nothing to do with elections.
Well, they have a little something to do with elections because the polls are about the election. I do agree with you that they are now being used more to create narratives than they are anything else, but they are still about the elections. And this goes back to what Frank Luntz was saying, and I tend to agree with his commentary on that. And that's clear based off of how bad the polling has been. Let's get into a bit of this before we switch gears this morning here on the John Justice Show presented by American Experiment. Minnesota Republicans put electability before Trump. This is an article written by Walker Orenstein and Ryan Faircloth. The subheadline is, after 2 decades without a statewide victory, voters skipped polarizing contenders for governor, and the U.S. Senate nominated Lisa Dameth and Tafoya. And a couple of points they make in the article here. and I'll share with you some of my commentary. They say in previous elections, primary voters often tapped into an establishment streak to back to candidates who had little chance of victory in November. GOP voters instead chose their best funded candidates with Demuth and Tafoya. Republicans sent a message that in 20 years in the wilderness in statewide elections has grown tiring. This is according to Amy Frederickson, a GOP strategist and former Senate Majority Leader. Mark York, a Lake Wilson farmer who dropped out of the U.S. Senate race earlier this year, said the shift represented by Republicans is choosing pragmatism over purity. We all want to push for conservatism to the max, and whatever your core beliefs are, he said. But these results signal a wave of the Republican Party saying we are going to do what it takes to win. I push back a little bit on this. It's as if to say it's like this sort of in-between of these candidates not being conservative or as conservative as other candidates. And I just don't buy into that. And I'll give you the example here in just a second, because the article writers at the Star Tribune kind of lean into this thought as well. In the Senate race, the GOP endorsed a candidate, Adam Schwarzy, an ex-Navy SEAL who lacked a name ID and had a mediocre fundraising, according to the Star Tribune, failed to break through to primary voters. He did do better than the polling suggested. I mean, the polling had him way down, and he ended up, I think they maybe had him at like 9 or 10%, and he ended up with like 21%. So there was, again, that discrepancy within the polling numbers. Embattled 2024 nominee Royce White, the MAGA firebrand who regularly unleashes homophobic invective online, finished a distant third. Yes, Royce White has an opinion that the most of us hold regarding the issue of biological boys that shouldn't be allowed to play in girls' sports. But of course, that's just homophobia, according to the writers at the Star Tribune. There's no bias there, right? Listen, this actually echoes what's happened on the left. So it's not an anomaly in the difference between candidates here, except for the fact, the political divide of the individuals that got nominated versus those that didn't. But you see, on the left, you've got socialist communists versus socialist sympathetic leftists. They're not all that different. Whereas on the right, you could maybe say you have conservative candidates and slightly less conservative candidates. It's very similar to what's happening over on the Democrat side of things, on the Republican side of things. However, the extremes, there is no comparison by any stretch. The Star Tribune wants to go and label, MAGA extremists. But the reality is, no, those views are mostly adopted by the majority of conservatives. Some individuals are more vocal than others. You do have some candidates like a Michelle Tafoya who has beliefs on certain issues that run counter to your traditional conservatives. But again, this phenomenon has no exclusivity whatsoever to the Republican Party, as we have seen with what's happened during this primary regarding these far left self-avowed socialist communists. And yet they ended up losing, not all of them, but some of them ended up losing, like in Wisconsin, to a candidate who the left wants to deem more moderate, when the reality is, no, they're just as radical as the other individuals are. They're just not as vocal about it. All right, I threw out the question of how many of you went to vote in the primary and voted against a party. Some of you responded to the blaster line. Let's hear some of your thoughts and why you did what you did.
Good morning, John. I did vote Democrat, my wife and I, in 2024 because we wanted Don Samuels to win the primary over the lunatic liberal, but it didn't work. I should have did it in 2022 when he had a better chance.
So you didn't do that this year, though. Okay. Thank you, though, for the comment at 612-584-4565. Again, 612-584-4565. Let's go and hear from Richard, his thoughts on this primary election this week.
Good morning, John. With respect to the primary voting, I didn't do it this year, but in the past, I think the last two primaries, I'm in the 5th district, and I voted in the Democratic primary specifically to vote against Ilhan Omar because they had a credible candidate those two primaries. This year there was not one, so I didn't do it this year. I voted in the Republican primary, but I did vote in the Democratic primary just to vote against Ilhan Omar. Have a great day.
Thank you for the comment this morning. I appreciate it.
Hey, John. Me and my wife both voted for crazy Peggy. We're both conservatives. She can be beatable. That was our plan.
Well, and it's a sound plan. 612-584-4565. All right, let me share with you a couple of audio clips before we go and shift gears. Laimi Klobuchar, okay? This was posted by her official account on X. Somebody had commented yesterday, I think we played it on the air, and I agree. She just doesn't look happy. Or maybe it was my wife, Melinda. Anyway, Amy Klobuchar just doesn't look happy. I will continue, unless I see evidence of something different, I will continue to contend that she doesn't really want this gig. She was stilted reading from her victory speech after her coronation, or as other people say, after she was crowned. And even in this clip, which is being used by Democrats to promote her candidacy, I still don't hear anything genuine and authentic on top of the commentary that is utterly ridiculous.
Mike Lindell, as you know, is Donald Trump's guy. He got Trump's complete and total endorsement. Mike Lindell may be Donald Trump's choice, but I want to be Minnesota's choice. And Lisa Dameth, you may have seen her advertisements recently, lots of them. Well, most of those ads are paid for by one person, one man, one billionaire who doesn't even live in Minnesota. And who does this guy want? He wants her in the governor's office. And while she may be this Wisconsin billionaire's choice, I want to be Minnesota's choice for governor.
So, a couple of things on this. I want to go back to this whole ridiculous the money versus the many phrase. I will give the Democrats credit. They are so good when it comes to the terminology. I'm not going to lie. We eye roll. I will criticize this, but it's effective. It works among, you know, those green-haired, dyed voting goblins out there and those angry white liberal women. The money over versus the many works, even though it's utterly ridiculous. First off, though, on this clip, she doesn't refute anything that's in the claims. You know, she talks about Lindell. He's not the nominee. So she had to bring Lindell up because Trump endorsed Lindell, even though he didn't win the nomination. So she's got to get that in there just to plant the mental seed of, hey, don't forget your Trump derangement syndrome. Got to get that Trump derangement syndrome gland fed. So she brings that up, even though Lindell's not a part of this equation anymore. And then when she goes and talks about Lisa Dameth, what does she do? She says, you've probably seen all those ads. Those were paid for by somebody outside of Minnesota. She doesn't refute anything that was in the ads. She doesn't say they were wrong. She doesn't say they were off-based. No, they're going to attempt to go and use this, the money versus the many. The truth of the matter is, Amy Klobuchar doesn't have a leg to stand on. You know, she's borderline. Some 40+% of her donations come from outside of Minnesota. So when you're talking about, 5, 10, 11, percent of those donations, it's not like she is exclusively taking just dollars from the people of Minnesota. You don't think for a second that the DNC is going to throw and organizations that know that she is a rubber stamp on Governor Tim Walz and the radical left's agenda? I think those GOP candidates need to start using that terminology. Laimi Klobuchar is Governor Tim Walz 2.0, a rubber stamp on everything that he's done. While she attempts to go and say she's going to be a transformative governor, why would you need to be a transformative governor when you already have a Democrat governor in place and your party still has a slim majority within the legislature? Why do you need to transform anything? You guys have been in charge. But this is the type of manipulation, it's nothing new, that you will end up seeing coming from these Democrats. Elizabeth Warren out there touting the same money versus the many line in the clip she put up on social media.
Bruce and Bailey and I will.
Let me back that up because she's talking about Peggy Flanagan and she's very, very happy.
Peggy Flanagan won. Bruce and Bailey and I will take a celebratory walk in the morning. But for right now, it's congratulations, Peggy. And a reminder to all of America that money doesn't always win. That sometimes what wins is getting out there and putting on the right fight for people. So happy about this. Everybody's going to celebrate for at least a couple of hours, and then it's back to work to make this an election victory in November. So anybody who wants to celebrate, send your $5 to peggyflanagan.com. She's earned it. This is a good night.
So it's money versus the many, but hey, send them money. Oh, they're all such hacks. You know who's not a hack? It's a friend of the show, Rick, who left us a blast at 612-584-4565.
Hi, John. I didn't vote in the primary because I just couldn't make a decision. I looked at their records and what they stood for, and for the most part, I thought they were really good candidates. So I just thought I'd leave it in the hands of God and the voters. And I'm pretty pleased with the result.
Let's also go. Thank you, Rick. It's always great to hear from you here on the show.
The Star Tribune article is just more proof of the political zealotry that is going on in today's society. You can't have compromise. You can't have middle ground. Everything has to be all or nothing. And it drives me nuts how you have to be a purist in all aspects and all issues.
I had a friend of the show, Susan, on X, posted. Not sure if I can listen to Amy K's grading voice clips every morning. So maybe we need to come to some sort of deal between the friends of the show and the show itself. See, I see value now in playing Amy Klobuchar's clips. Okay. She is the gubernatorial candidate. We're going to have to hear from her. I'm with you. Okay. It's nails on a chalkboard or worse to hear from her. But I also think that, you know what? There may be some inspiration in that. Maybe the more clips that we play of Amy Klobuchar on the show, the better the opportunity will be for her to be beat, because people will just simply go, we need to make sure she loses, because the last thing I want is for her to become governor and then John Justice and his show with American Experiment having to be in a position to play her ridiculous comments all the time. So maybe we go through some short-term pain now between here today on August 13th and November to play the Amy Klobuchar clips in hopes that she loses, so that we can ensure at least do our part. Maybe that's what you should want. So we can come to some kind of deal, because unfortunately, this is just the reality that we are going to have to live in right now. All right, 612-584. 4565 again, 612-584-4565. Really quick, if you're experiencing any type of pain, sore muscles, sore joints, bad hips, anything that makes you groan when you stand up, the Triple Diamond Pain Cream at Mini Leaf, also along with their night gummies that you've heard me talk about, the Triple Diamond Pain Cream is an absolute game changer. You know, listen, if you're out doing activity, if you're golfing, if you're out doing yard work, right? Individuals who use this pain cream, and I've used this pain cream, I've dealt with this before, right? You put some in the areas where you're affected, where you're receiving that pain, and that pain goes away. It's available at minileaf.com. It can be delivered right to your door as well. Easy to use, absolutely effective, and all of the Mini Leaf products available at the website. They're all third-party tested. The results are available right there on the website. As I've talked about, I swear by the night gummies. They are what ensures a good night's sleep for this talk show host, You take one before you go to bed, and you get a great night's sleep. You wake up feeling refreshed. Maybe you're looking for an alternative to your alcoholic beverages, the Spooky Mini Leaf Tonics. They are absolutely delicious. Looking to relax, the Fun Gummies, and of course, the Triple Diamond Pain Cream. All available where you will taste happy at MINNELEAF.com. That's minileaf.com. Head on over there today when you have the opportunity. And we're so thankful to have them on board here on the John Justice Show, presented by American Experiment. If you would like to also be an advertiser and a supporter of the show in that way, email me, john.justice@americanexperiment.org, and I will get you in touch with the individuals who are in charge of handling that. So, quick update on this. I haven't talked about it on the show. We've been so swamped with everything else going on. Todd Blanche was sworn in over the weekend, this past weekend, as U.S. Attorney General, cementing Donald Trump's installation of his former personal attorney in charge of the Justice Department. He's been serving as the acting attorney general since April, was confirmed in his new position during the ceremony at the White House that took place on Monday. The Senate voted narrowly in favor of his confirmation in the role, with the Republican-led upper chamber voting 50-49 in the early hours of Saturday morning. Every Democrat rejected his nomination. And local DFL hack political shill Patrick Hooligan has an article in the Minnesota Reformer that I want to spend some time tearing apart. So we'll get to this in just a moment. But yesterday, there were some major moves by the Attorney General, Todd Blanche. I got a couple of clips. First of all, you got to go back to, and I'll play this in just a moment. Remember, he was heavily involved. He came out with the announcement of the allegations against the Southern Poverty Law Center. He's actually gone so far now with the DOJ to arrest the former CFO of the Southern Poverty Law Center on fraud charges, Heidi Barrich. She was in charge of secretly paying donor money to white supremacist groups and ran the SLPC's project to tracking hate groups in the United States. Here's a little bit of commentary from this individual who's now been arrested now in the wake of this DOJ investigation. Again, Heidi Barrich.
Views, I think white supremacy is, one of the worst things mankind has come up with. Well, I can have a direct impact on these movements. And in the first year I was there, we did some very good work, myself and my colleagues, exposing anti-immigrant networks in the United States, some of which are still functioning today.
Yeah, that was Heidi Barrich. Sounds like a dude. It's a female on camera. Just got a very deep voice, or otherwise. Todd Blanche, though, made the announcement of the arrest of the CFO in a press conference that took place earlier this week.
Vice President Vance referred the top Democratic leadership.
Unsealed a case against the former chief financial officer of the Southern Poverty Law Center. Can you please speak a little bit about what you've learned as part of that investigation, and if we should expect more charges?
Yes, today, my understanding is today there was an arrest made, and there is a new indictment that includes the former CFO of SPLC. I don't have any comments about whether, we've said from the beginning, everybody, not just me, but anybody who's talked about this case, like virtually every criminal case, the fact that an indictment is returned doesn't end the investigation. It's just part of the investigation in most cases, which is certainly true in this case. I think, as alleged in the indictment, this individual participated in the scheme as alleged. I believe she was part of the effort to open bank accounts in completely fictitious companies' names and make payments to individuals for reasons that were not that they were not accurate as described. But I don't have. I think the indictment was unsealed this morning. I believe it was unsealed this morning. I think the arrest was this morning. I don't have anything to say beyond that, except to say that this is exactly what we said would happen in a case like this, which is that our investigators and the U.S. attorneys and the agents working the case can keep on working it even after the initial indictment.
I wanted to share this with you to set up some commentary surrounding this piece in the Minnesota Reformer prior to the confirmation of Todd Blanche as the acting attorney general. J. Patrick Hooligan from the Minnesota Reformer, again, the hack DFL shill. I've talked about him before on the show. He says that Todd Blanche still thinks he's Trump's lawyer, which means he can't be our lawyer. Just immediately establish the narrative. Minnesotans should pay special attention, writes Coolican, to the Senate's vote to confirm Blanche as Attorney General. Todd Blanche, the acting Attorney General and nominee to be the Attorney General of the United States, slipped up during his Senate confirmation hearings when asked about his relationship with President Donald Trump. He said, "I'm his lawyer, was his lawyer." That's the basis for this entire piece. Todd Blanche, in the middle of the Senate confirmation hearings, just misspoke. He used to be Trump's lawyer, but he's not Trump's lawyer anymore, so he just corrected it. To which J. Patrick Coolican just writes the entirety of this article based off of that alone. He says, "Oopsies, the Attorney General is the lawyer for the United States government. We the people, and his obligation is to the law and the Constitution, not his former client's lawless whims." Like, no quarter given at all, no leeway. You've got article writers over at the Star Tribune, like Rochelle Olson, giving all the leeway in the world to their party, to the alleged conduct of their elected officials, not, just saying, we don't believe the allegations, even though I'm going to slam the people making the allegations. You see this all the time. But of course, you get an individual who's aligned it all with Trump, hated by those on the left, does one slip of the tongue, and suddenly, oh my gosh, there it is. It's been exposed. He's not our lawyer. He's Trump's lawyer. He wants to destroy the country. He goes on to write, "We've all become too aware of his misplaced priorities and and the allegations here in Minnesota. Blanche was Trump's criminal lawyer when the then ex-president was charged and convicted in the porn star payoff cover-up." So we're just checking off all the boxes now. It's like Eric from Brainerd, just hitting all the points, right? So you got porn star payoff coverage, the attempt to overturn the 2020 election, and charged with stealing classified documents and storing them in a Mar-a-Lago bathroom and other unsecured locations, even though we now have all the clarity needed for what happened with that event and how Trump was absolutely targeted, and Joe Biden done exactly the same thing, but it's totally fine that he had all of his documents there next to his prized Corvette inside of his vacation home. Everyone deserves a criminal defense, says Coolican, but the American people deserve better than Blanche. Last month, a federal judge in Florida released a scathing order over the Trump slush fund episode, during which Blanche negotiated a deal between Trump, i.e. his boss, and the government, i.e. his client. There's such pinkies up just oozing from articles like this, right? Feels like so much better than everybody else. The court determines that the plaintiffs improperly employed this lawsuit to justify a particular award in this matter, which was accomplished by leveraging control over defendants, she wrote. In other words, a sleazy deal. For J. Patrick Coolican, he who lives in glass houses should not throw stones, but Coolican loves playing on only one side of the argument, as if there aren't plenty of circumstances and instances where you can go and make exactly the same claim when it comes to Democrats over and over and over again. But we'll just pay no mind to that. As a matter of fact, J. Patrick Coolican in this piece completely ignores a whole bunch of things relating to Todd Blanche, including what I just played a moment ago with the Southern Poverty Law Center arrest, and the fact that the DOJ, which I don't see any Democrats going and pushing back on, exposed the Southern Poverty Law Center for being nothing more than a scam. Of course, there's no mention of that in this article. What is he up to? Oh, January 6th. In addition to money for cop-beating January 6th insurrectionists, the deal would provide the president with immunity from the IRS. Closer to home, Blanche has been the Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General in the Department of Justice and has failed to bring charges against any of the men responsible for the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy and the shooting of Julio Sosis Celis. So again, we're just playing the hits, and maybe that's because there shouldn't be any charges brought against the officers relating to those different circumstances. As tragic and harmful as they were, all of those could have been avoided if the individuals didn't go and take to the streets at the urging of the very politicians that J. Patrick Coolican goes and supports, putting them in harm's way. And once again, As a reminder, the Minnesota Reformer itself just this week ran an article about how ICE is arrested and has arrested and deported more criminal illegal aliens in the month of July than since the start of any ICE operations under Trump. And we've heard no controversies whatsoever. Why? Because you haven't had Democrats out there urging people to go and get in their way. And when you don't have Democrats out there urging on the street insurrectionists to block lawful law enforcement, guess what happens? Lawful law enforcement is able to just go and do their job like they always do. There's no destruction to neighborhoods. There's no tearing down of communities. None of the public is at risk. The public is only at risk when you have individuals who are stupid enough to believe they're elected leftist politicians who encourage them to take to the streets and observe what's going on, which results in people not being able to control their base set of emotions that go and put them in harm's way, which leads to sometimes incredibly tragic events. But of course, none of that gets mentioned in pieces like this. He goes on to say, but at least the DOJ was chasing the real criminals, like Minnesota elected officials, including Governor Tim Walz, Keith Ellison, Jacob Frey, whose offices were sent wide-ranging subpoenas in an apparent criminal inquiry, which prompted a leak by the feds in an obvious effort to strong-arm the people we elected. He has no interest whatsoever in the accountability for the fraud and corruption here in Minnesota. It's totally fine for Democrats to go and launch all kinds of ridiculous investigations when it comes to Republicans, but heaven forbid Republicans ever go and do that to any Democrats at all. Then he talks about the federal judge appointed by President George W. Bush who quashed the subpoenas with gusto. Look, there's no surprise there. This particular judge, even though they were appointed by President George W. Bush, was an illegal alien sympathetic TDS suffering judge. In a word, he was absolutely biased. He goes on to write, the DOJ has pursued a bevy of similarly fantastical investigations that have illustrated Blanche's total lack of independence from his former client and drawn the mockery they deserve. Yet, like it's a new thing that the DOJ under a particular administration is beholden to that particular administration. You want to talk about fantastical. You want to talk about fantasy land. It's this idea that J. Patrick Kulikin puts forward in the Minnesota Reformer that suddenly Todd Blanche should be against the very individual of which is his boss, which is the same thing that rings true for any administration and their attorney general within the Department of Justice. He talks about these different instances in which Vance has moved forward on particular issues. The sandwich thrower, the Olympian pool vandal, the former head of the FBI in Minnesota, journalists doing that thing with my finger covering protests, Renee Good's wife, 15 anti-ICE activists not accused of violence but kicking a car and knocking an agent's notes out of his hand. You know, he says fantastical and I say relevant. And again, let's compare this to the bevy of Minnesota DFL individuals who have been accused of inappropriate behavior. Those who have received reduced or incredibly light sentences. The Tesla vandal who ended up making more money within the government under Democrat rule, even though he was out there randomly going and vandalizing people's personal property. The DFL chairwoman who was convicted in a hit and run, who ended up receiving an incredibly light sentence, even though she was involved in the death of an individual that she scurried away from. No mention of that. He wraps up with the DOJ's open hostility towards Minnesota extends to our institutions as well. The feds have sued Minnesota and other states for refusing to hand over the redacted voter rolls, which would be a violation of our state law guarding the privacy of voters. Again, doesn't care at all about the potential for fraud. Doesn't care about the fact that other states have gone and handed over those rolls. And guess what? It's been determined that a lot of people are voting in our elections that shouldn't be voting in our elections, which really raises the question of why is it that Secretary of State Steve Simon refuses to go and turn over our voter rolls? What is he trying to hide? As ProPublica reported recently, federal judges across the country have called the Trump's Justice Department at various times unlawful, unethical, unseemingly, and otherwise dishonest. Yeah, so a bunch of far leftist, radical, communist sympathizing publications don't like Trump. This is me sitting here without my shocked face. I suppose it's fitting that in this admission, this common reprobate is up for a promotion. And again, the most egregious thing about this entire piece is the complete omission of Blanche's most significant charges, especially, as I mentioned, against the SPLC. And just as a reminder for everybody, here is a bit of Todd Blanche when he was making that announcement, of which J. Patrick Coolican, the DFL hack shill that he is, refused to even go and acknowledge. So I guess he's fine with these organizations going and scamming the American public and creating false narratives that people have been injured over, quite frankly.
Good afternoon. Today, a few minutes ago, in the Middle District of Alabama, a grand jury returned an 11-count indictment charging the Southern Poverty Law Center with 6 counts of wire fraud, 4 counts of bank fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit money laundering. According to the charges in the indictment, the SPLC is a nonprofit entity that purports to fight white supremacy and racial hatred by reporting on extremist groups and conducting research to inform law enforcement groups with the goal of dismantling these groups. As the indictment describes, the SPLC was not dismantling these groups. It was instead manufacturing the extremism it purports to oppose by paying sources to stoke racial hatred. The indictment describes this conduct in detail, but one troubling example is that the SPLC was paying a member of the leadership group that planned the Unite the Right protest in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017 that resulted in the death of 1 person and injured dozens more. This particular person being paid by the SPLC allegedly received approximately $270,000 over the course of 8 years. In total, according to the indictment, between 2014 and 2023, SPLC paid at least $3 million to 8 individuals at least. These individuals were affiliated with the Ku Klux Klan, United Klans of America, National Socialist Movement, Aryan Nations Affiliated Sadistic Souls Motorcycle Club, the Nationalist Socialist Party of America, Nazis, and the American Front. Now, as the indictment lays out, after SPLC paid members of these extremist groups, it created work product that reported on these activities that the members participated in or contributed to. And to that end, it was doing the exact opposite of what it's told its donors it was doing.
2 things can be true at once, and this is what drives me nuts. And the big reason why I wanted to share with you that article from the Minnesota Reformer and juxtapose it with these clips from Todd Blanche. I don't have any expectation that these far left radicals are going to go and appreciate or respect any member of the Trump administration. But these are people that have a voice. They're well respected within the community. People listen to what they have to say. And it's hack journalism to not go and at least address the other aspects of what Todd Blanche has done. So how does J. Patrick Coolican feel about the fact that if it wasn't for Todd Blanche and the DOJ, these individuals of the Southern Poverty Law Center would be getting away with their scam? But it doesn't matter to them. This is what their Trump derangement syndrome does to them. It makes them bias, shills, and hacks that perpetuate the false narratives of the Democrat Party. It's tragic. It contributes to horrible outcomes in elections. It contributes to the broken and the brainwashed buying into all of this. And it does a grave disservice to the people of Minnesota. late than never to kick off hour 3 here on the John Justice Show, presented by American Experiment and AmericanExperiment.org. Remember, if you missed any portion of today's show, you can get caught up on the podcast available on the MixLR app, where you can listen to the show live. Also on all the major podcast platforms, and you can watch at MN Think Tank, and also on Facebook and YouTube at Center of the American Experiment, and my personal Facebook and YouTube pages. All right, I want to get back to the Blaster line, 612-584-4565. Friend of the show, Scott, has left us a comment. A little bit off topic, but in total, sort of relating to the show so far. He has several things that he has to say. I don't want to give my prediction on the Scott Conn level because I've read some of the text here, so I'm going to blindly go. I'm going to not share my thoughts because I feel like it will be biased, but I will ask Devin. So Devin, he's talking about how he's right of center. He's very pragmatic, but he's also very concerned with extremist Republicans. Where do you think Scott lands today on the Scott Conn level?
4.
Going to go with the 4? Yeah. All right. Devin says 4 on the Scott Conn level. Let's go ahead and find out, and we'll hear from a friend of the show, Scott.
Good morning, John. I am a independent right-of-center person that is very pragmatic, and I'm telling everybody out there, the Republican purists are the ones that continue to make sure that we don't get over the top when it comes election day. Life has shades of gray, and if we're too far to the right, you're never going to pull in the independent voters that you need to tip the scale. We have some great candidates right now, and we don't need somebody that's been endorsed by Donald Trump, because the left gets up in a fury to vote against him or anybody else that he supports. So let's be smart this time and win some political offices come November.
Yeah, you were right in a 5. I mean, in a 4, but he hit a 5 on that one.
He might have been at a 6 at one point.
Yeah. So thank you as always, friend of the show, Scott. Always appreciate hearing your commentary. And again, 612-584-4565, 612-584-4565. If you want to leave a comment here on the John.
Good morning, John. Dennis, Southwest Minnesota. I voted for the candidates, Mike and Michelle. They're not politicians. They're not in there now. I didn't want to vote for the people that are in there now that are running. What are they waiting for to fix the fraud? You know, they're running on it, and they're running on bash Trump. But what are they doing to fix the fraud now? Amy's such a hack. I don't know what happened to that woman, but she's such a hack. I always voted for people that can do the job, and this is crazy. Have a good day, John. Love your show. Bye.
Thank you so much for the kind words. And again, if you want to leave a comment, 612-584-4565. That is the Blaster line. Also, you can email john.justice@americanexperiment.org. Before we get into more immigration-related items, including the ICE agents could soon be wearing electric shock gloves. There was a tragedy that took place yesterday. I just want to get you an update on. 3 people, this comes from Fox 9, 3 people, including a child, were found dead at an in-home daycare in Hopkins. The deaths are believed to be the result of a domestic violence incident. The father suspected of killing the mother and daughter before taking his own life. Just absolutely tragic. The daycare, licensed to care for up to 10 children, had no recent violations and was set to close due to relationship issues between the owners. So the police say that 3 people found dead in the daycare. It was a 41-year-old man, a 41-year-old woman, and a 7-year-old girl. The police say the mother and daughter were stabbed to death, and the father died of the self-inflicted gunshot wound. 7 children total were in the daycare, 1 deceased. The other 6 children weren't harmed. They have been reunited with their parents. The man found dead was believed to be the perpetrator. The dead adults are believed to be the daycare owners. The mother and their daughter were found dead in the basement, while the father was found on the upper floor of the daycare. The daycare owners lived at the home. However, Burnsville police say the suspect may have been living recently with the Burnsville victim. The police say the killings appear to be an act of domestic violence. Yesterday, when the news broke, it's one of those things here in Minnesota when you get a story like this and you get breaking news and it's just stabbing at a local daycare, your mind just runs wild. Just where your head goes, especially based off of the tragedies that have taken place before. This was obviously completely senseless. And to get to further details on it, the Hopkins scene at the Brown Daycare Center. It's an in-home daycare center located on Second Street Northeast, west of Blake Road North, in a quiet neighborhood across from a park. Some neighbors told Fox 9 they didn't realize the house was even a daycare. They referred to the home as the garage house because of the large decal that covers the garage. Officials also now say that a homicide in Burnsville on Wednesday is also suspected to be connected to the deadly Hopkins attack. The Burnsville victim was identified only as a 78-year-old woman, believed to be a close relative of the Hopkins suspect. Officers said in Hopkins. Burnsville police said they responded shortly before 12:30 to the area for the report of the stabbing, and that's where they found the woman dead. State records show the daycare was licensed to care for up to 10 children with no more than 6 under school age. It had been inspected 3 times in recent years, found to be in compliance. State records show no violations against the daycare center. No evidence of fraud. The daycare had first been issued a license in February of 2019 and was registered in the name of the victim. A friend of the murdered daycare worker told local news that the owner was planning to close her daycare because she planned to leave her spouse who owned the home. The friend said that there were issues in the relationship, including potential abuse. So what else do you say in the wake of a tragedy like this other than, prayers go out for those personally and directly impacted by this horrible tragedy, which just seemed to be, again, because of some domestic dispute incident. All right, let's go here in an immigration update. Journalist Georgia Fort, you might remember her from being part of the group that protested the city's church in St. Paul. She's been indicted for, they say, doing that thing with my fingers, covering the protest. She's seeking a dismissal of the charges. Fort's attorneys argue the prosecution violates her First Amendment rights and constitutes a vindictive prosecution. Well, what was she doing there? She was being pretty vindictive against the people of the church over their allegations that one of its members worked for ICE. They claim the government targeted Fort for her journalism and the content of her reporting, despite video evidence contradicting the prosecution's claims. She showed up there to protest. She's using her covering the protest as a cover, just like Don Lemon did. Now, because we live in Minnesota, because there is a double standard relating to when Republicans or conservatives go and do something that may be criminal, and when Democrats go and do something that may be criminal, I expect that more than likely some hacktivist judge is probably going to let this individual off the hook. But again, they're using their journalism and just covering the event as cover, because if you watched any of the footage, like I did and so many of you did, whether it was Don Lemon, whether it was Georgia Fort, whether it was that lunatic bearded guy whose name I've forgotten, I'm totally fine that I forgot his name. They were all there for one reason and one reason only, and that was to terrorize the people of this church because an individual was associated locally with ICE. And just feel free to go back in your mind and think of the commentary that I just did a moment ago regarding the Minnesota Reformer and that J. Patrick Coolican piece about how all of this would have been avoided. These people had just gone and stayed home. But they need a cause to go and fight for to expand their agenda. That's why they do this. They're not going to be rational. They're too lazy to go and just push policy, just support candidates, live their lives normally. Nope. They need to go and appeal to their broken and brainwashed supporters who get a rise out of this, who donate money when they go out and act like a bunch of protesting lunatics. And this here was another example of that. These charges were absolutely appropriate. They were there to terrorize the church. That's it. Whether they were reporting on it, they were reporting on their own terrorizing of the church. And I hope a judge does not let these individuals off. Which leads me to the whole reason why you now have Immigrations and Customs Enforcement agents taking to the streets, potentially equipped with gloves that deliver painful electric shocks to deal with the combative arrests out on the streets. And it's not just the targets. It's the individuals that go and get in the way of these agents. The federal government plans to spend up to $20 million on thousands of conductive distraction and de-escalation devices by March, according to the Associated Press and a Monday Department of Homeland Security DHS notice. The technology known as, you ready? GLOVE, Generated Low Output Voltage Emitter. How much did somebody get paid to come up with that title just so they can end up on GLOVE? Did they put shock? Did they try to use the letters in shock? Shock doesn't work. You know what? GLOVE. I think we can make that one work. Reminds me of S.H.I.E.L.D. We've been doing a Marvel rewatch as of late. So the GLOVE, Generated Low Output Voltage Emitter, has been used by other law enforcement agencies across the country to control violent suspects inside jails and in the field. It comes as sources within ICE have described an uptick in violence by individuals they're trying to arrest. One agency source told the Daily Wire the new technology could serve as a useful deterrent among arrests. It's kind of like I'm reminded of the old school. You probably don't remember this, probably before your time. But there used to be this thing you can put in your hand, and when somebody goes and shakes your hand and go, it would buzz and shock them.
I think we had things similar to that.
Yeah, it was like a trope in a lot of movies and all that. And you put, hey, how you doing? Right.
Or like the gum box that had like a piece of gum sticking out, and then you pull it and then it shocks you.
Yes, there's that too.
Yep.
What I'd be worried about when it comes to the ICE agents is, just make sure you don't high five each other after a good arrest of a criminal illegal alien. I don't think they're really doing that. I don't know. I would. That was a good arrest. He was a murderer. That was good. High five. We locked up the rapist. The company behind the product, a Kentucky-based Compliant Technologies LLC, says the gloves are not a weapon, but a device used to quickly distract with a small, uncomfortable electrical pulse when making contact with the skin. Okay, so you can't do glove on glove, you would be fine. You got to be contact with the skin. Gotcha. The discomfort associated with the stimulation is usually effective in bringing down individuals into compliance in less than 3 seconds and leaves no burns, marks, or scars. This is according to the Compliant Technologies website. Julie wrote in and said a joy buzzer. That's what they called it. Joy buzzer. The one that goes in your hand, the trick one, not the generated low output voltage emitter. The technology is safe and it does not penetrate the subject's body. Also, allowing officers to grab the individual being stimulated with no fear of feedback to their own bodies. Okay, well, that's good. The shocks can't pass through clothing, hair, metal, plastic, or fur, according to the company. Agents must complete the training course before using the gloves and then get recertified to operate them every 2 years, or what they call the dim walls rule. That way they can't complain that these guys are not trained, which is a bogus argument anyways. So I saw this story and I was like, all right, cue up the outrage from the anti-ICE crowd. And wouldn't you know it, within a matter of like 2 or 3 clicks of web pages, I found the outrage. ICE plan to give officers electric shock gloves. It draws outrage and fears of misuse. Of course it does. Well, you know what? Maybe ICE agents don't need the gloves and they should just use their firearms more often. Choose your way to incapacitate the target. Which one do you guys want to use? Well, they don't want them to use anything. They want to abolish ICE, for crying out loud. The size of the purchase suggests that ICE does plan to give the device to most or all of its officers. I'm working off an article now from the Associated Press. You know, that stalwart of fair and balanced media. We are outraged, said New York Attorney General Letitia James, of course, first out of the gate, right? At a news conference on Wednesday, where she was warned that ICE officers who misuse the gloves in her state could face criminal and civil consequences. You mean like any law enforcement agent that misuses their power like that? Okay. Yeah. All right, before I get into more details of this, let's get to some of your thoughts from the blaster line at 612-584-4565. And we'll hear from a friend of the show, Mike, here on the John Justice Show.
John Maspos, Mike from Clearwater. You're talking about how ICE is able to do its job easier because there's no Democrats pushing back because they haven't been sending their minions out to do the radical, racial, horrible protests. I'm wondering if maybe quietly the Justice Department has cracked down on the funding of these paid protesters that they fly around the country that are members of Antifa and enemies to the nation. That would be interesting if we could do some research on that and see if that's the reason why we're not having mass protests at ICE arrests anymore.
Well, and I know there is quite a bit of commentary, Mike, around like the canceling of USAID and how suddenly now the number of protests that we typically see has kind of gone by the wayside. I'm not the first person to go and mention this. Other conservative commentators have talked about this, and they actually have more knowledge than I do on the subject. But they've been keeping track of what we typically see, especially when we get into the spring and summer months here in America, of these protests that take place across the country. And this year, there's been a lot fewer of these protests. Now, relating to Operation Metro Surge, there's an argument to be made that if this is true, that there was government funding that's been cut off by the Trump administration in the wake of his second term, that perhaps this has led to the decrease in these protests. So why did Operation Metro Surge take place? If there were individuals, and we know not all of them, but there were individuals within Operation Metro Surge that were taken to the streets that were certainly being paid. As a matter of fact, there were prominent activists in Minneapolis that admitted as much. That Lavish, I can't remember his last. He goes by Lavish Mac, I think is his name. Just this lunatic who's made a name for himself and it's been very lucrative for him. He was on a show over the course of the past couple of months talking about the amount of money that he was getting paid. And as a matter of fact, the show host on the podcast was lamenting the fact that he didn't get paid as much as Lavish Mac did. So when it came to those protests, it could have been there was still money left over in the coffers of the organizations that were funneling dollars to these protesters taking to the streets. And that could be one of the reasons why you saw Operation Metro Surge take place. But then since then, it's all calmed down. I think another aspect of this, too, is that the Democrats have put their sights on someplace else. ICE has served as a useful tool at the time. But now that we were getting closer to the primaries, closer to the general, even the left knows that when it comes to illegal immigration, this is an issue that crosses party lines. Not with everybody, but it is. Don't forget the number of individuals that you saw acting stupid, the on-the-street insurrectionists during Operation Metro Surge, it still pales in comparison to the population. It's a very small percentage of Democrat individuals. Even the people that go and took to the streets in the massive rallies to push back against ICE, wherein the media pushed out, the throngs of individuals flooding the downtown streets. I remember doing commentary and looking at the data where that was a fraction of the population here in Minnesota. It's made it seem like it's how the majority of individuals feel, but it was not reflective at all of the majority opinion. So I think when it comes to Democrats, it was no longer politically expedient for them to continue to go and push for individuals to get in the way of ICE operations. And again, that's been shown when it comes to the July numbers and the number of criminal illegal aliens that have been arrested by the Trump administration. So there may be a funding issue, but it could just be a shift in tactics because the left isn't dumb. And they end up pushing these particular false narratives at times when it is most convenient for them politically speaking. Getting back to the protests over these gloves, I had a email that came in from a friend of the show, Tammy. She says, I would be careful using the glove on seniors. It could act as a defibrillator and it could reactivate them. Yeah. Okay. The seniors like to go out there and just protest with their stupid signs. They just like to be bodies, the NPCs out there. Most of them aren't getting involved in the on-the-street insurrectionist activity. No, those are the those are more of your Antifa types. All right. Let's go back to the blaster line at 612-584-4565. Friend of the show wants to comment on friend of the show, Scott, and his comments at the top of the hour here on the John Justice Show presented by American Experiment.
Morning, John. One of the things Republicans could do to get over the hump, as I don't know what the full end on the StatCon level or whatever that is really hit the economy, as in the consolidation of everything in our economy, the monopolies, the monopolistic practices of every industry being consolidated, driving down competition, which drives price up, and it drives employment down, and leads to everything being offshored. If the Republicans would just start working on that, along with all the other things, obviously the terrible stances by the Democrats supporting the fraud, all of that, and the education and the insane communism, like, yeah, go after that, but start talking about the things that we need to fix in our economy and our.
Let me stop you here, because this is a similar refrain that I hear from a lot of individuals, and that is people that say, and there's nothing wrong with it, right? You make a lot of valid points, but saying that this is what the Republicans need to do. They need to focus on A, B, C, and D while doing all these other things. And I don't disagree. Don't forget, though, most Republicans are doing that. Most of the candidates are doing that. The problem is they don't get amplified by the left-wing media. And this goes back to commentary regarding social media, the way in which we receive our news, how it's changed, how these delegates choosing to endorse particular candidates is not relevant any longer with the endorsement process. My commentary around, we'll say, limiting debates, because debates are not nearly as consequential anymore. They are consequential in some cases, but for the most part, trying to find out the issues that the candidates care about, their stances on the issues, trying to do that through debates, it's become increasingly irrelevant, because you can find out almost everything about these candidates before they even take to the stage. You spend an hour going through social media, their campaign websites, what they've posted online, previous interviews, and you're going to hear and watch exactly the same thing that you will end up seeing on that debate stage. Sure, you can compare and contrast with the other candidate, and there are things that are beneficial about it, and people have mentioned that, and you're right to do so, regarding Joe Biden and that presidential debate that finally got him off the ticket, rightfully so. But for the most part, I think these debates are somewhat worthless. Now, to your point, though, you're right. Republicans need to focus on these things, but, and I hear this a lot, Republicans they do that. You just don't hear nearly as much about it because the mainstream media isn't covering it nearly as much. Just one more last point on this, and we'll move over to some other issues, get to a few more of your thoughts from the blaster line at 612-584-4565. The Department of Homeland Security, ICE's parent agency, issued a statement that did not mention the product specifically or explain why it was chosen. While the devices are marked as non-lethal and safe for the heart, there is a pending lawsuit. This is so funny. So the Associated Press tossed this in because it is a completely biased news outlet now. So there is one lawsuit, and it alleges that a 43-year-old man died in 2024 after he was shocked with the gloves inside of a jail. Now you may go, oh my gosh, this guy was shocked by the gloves and he died, and it's just dangerous. I thought they were non-lethal. He was shocked 27 times by the gloves, and then 13 more times by a taser. Not exactly the example that you should probably use if you're pushing back on the gloves. I guess if you want to say ICE agents are only allowed to shock individuals, let's say 25 times, and certainly only like 10 times additionally with a taser. Any more than that's excessive. I mean, clearly this guy couldn't be subdued if he was shocked that many times. You know, this is how supervillains are born. Isn't that how Electro was created? Well, according to the Andrew Garfield, the Amazing Spider-Man, he fell into a vat of electric eels. So it says it was a little bit different. I like Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man. I don't know anybody else. I mean, Tom Holland's better, but I think there's an argument to be made for Andrew Garfield. I don't know if I've mentioned this on the show. My son Logan looks exactly like Andrew Garfield. Like, it is terrifying how much my son Logan looks like Andrew Garfield. I'll have to do a side-by-side. I'll put up a side-by-side of the two of them. I mean, it's to the point wherever I see an Andrew Garfield trailer or any of the films that he was in, I just go, it's his doppelganger. Logan could go out in public and just claim he's Andrew Garfield, and people would believe him. Let's see. Former ICE acting director John Sandweg said Wednesday in an interview with MS Now, it's too easy for this to get misused against a population that doesn't pose a threat. Okay, but what about a population that does pose a threat? I'm pro-glove. The maker of the Taser recently phased out its stun drive feature, a similar pain compliance tool that had been misused by some officers. Michael Mannheimer, a law professor at Northern Kentucky University who's written about the police use of force and issues federal law enforcement operations, agreed the gloves raise concerns about the officers using disproportionate force. That's just a given, and we already have policies in place to go and deal with that when it comes to law enforcement officers. So I'm way less concerned about that. You have a law enforcement officer of any type in any field who goes and abuses their power, they need to be held accountable. When it comes to emerging technologies, yeah, this is probably a good idea. And maybe a better way than, I don't know, using lethal force. All right, let's get back to some of your thoughts from the Blaster line here on the John Justice Show, presented by American Experiment. Another comment.
Hey, John, great show so far. I'm going to push back a little bit on what Scott said. While there are some stubborn Republican purists in this state, I think most people do consolidate and get behind the candidate, whoever it may be. The bigger problem I see is the boomers being a huge voter bloc still in this country, being uninformed and just kind of old school, like, oh, I don't really pay attention to the news. You know, they watch the nightly news. They don't read into things. They don't know what's going on, actually. And they're just like, well, I've been voting Democrat since the 50s, so why not? You know, and that's an even bigger problem. There are people who just have no idea what's going on, and they're just like, well, status quo, I guess.
You know, unfortunately, I think you described most voters. We'll bring up the Joe Biden debate again. I'll never forget how I was in California. I was traveling at the time. That debate was happening. I did the show live from the living room in my father's house. I'll never forget. I was right there with the big TV in front of me. Governor Tim Walz was one of the first individuals on screen the next morning after that disastrous debate. But I remember after the debate going, why is everybody so shocked about how Joe Biden is? We've been seeing this for years. And I know this pushes back on my no debate stance, but again, maybe just for presidents and governors. But it's because the majority of individuals don't pay attention. They buy in, and even if they were paying attention to the mainstream media at the time was completely ignoring Biden's blatant cognitive decline. Let's get back to some more of your thoughts.
Good morning, John. You know, I love hearing Scott's blasts. I always look forward to them, generally agree with him. And I do agree that we can't be purists because then we won't get anybody on the right elected. And then we'll keep having the far leftists ruling the state of Minnesota. That said, the farther left they go, the more extreme they claim the right is. Yep. So that's my only beef with what Scott said. And even though it doesn't sound like it, I'm probably, at a level 5 with my feelings about that. So there we go.
Well, as we, for the final segment of the show, I want to switch some gears here. The DFL's Agriculture Committee co-chair says that Minnesota farmers have never had it so good. I have been sitting on a Gone Green stack that you do not want to miss, by the way. Okay. I've been sitting on this Gone Green stack now, I think, since we started the new show here at American Experiment. So I want to get into some of this ahead of tomorrow's Freedom Friday. Before we do that, though, I want to take just a moment. I want to peruse some of the blasts that have rolled into the blaster line at 612-584-4565. I've made an edit of the latest track from the house band here at the John Justice Show, the AI Overlords, and it certainly relates to everything that we've been talking about. Media manipulation, the broken and the brainwashed on the left, the people out there, the too many individuals out there who have been drinking the communism Kool-Aid.
Hillary's by the phone with a careful worried look, reading every headline like a line she didn't book. She sees the banner shift, she hears the easy cheer, and the whole old playbook starts to fog up in the rear. Now the table's turning slow with a polished, patient glow. Everybody in the room feels the current start to grow. Communism Kool-Aid, sipping by the poolside. Communism Kool-Aid, say it with a straight face. Voters in the cool shade, passing cups around the parade. Communism Kool-Aid, and nobody knows what to say. The marina keeps on shining while the arguments roll on. One side calls it progress, one side says the game is gone, and the tide keeps washing in like it owns the whole boardwalk. Smile Stay magazine bright while the dinner circles tall. Communism Kool-Aid, sipping by the poolside. Communism Kool-Aid, say it with a straight face. Voters in the cool shade, passing cups around the parade. Communism Kool-Aid, and nobody knows what to say. On the surface, heavy underneath, gentle as a summer wave rolling underneath the teeth. Easy on the surface, heavy underneath, gentle as a summer wave rolling underneath the teeth.
That song has no business being as good as it is. It just no business being as good as it is.
As soon as that saxophone hits, it just makes your day 10 times better.
Right? The AI overlords here on the John Justice Show and communism Kool-Aid. I'm so glad that I'm not a musician. It was funny. I played the I-35, the Scooter I-35 song a few days ago. We had Josiah Padley in talking about the school supplies, and I think we were playing it in the run up to when she joined us on the couch here in the American Experiment studio. She was like, "This is artificial intelligence." Yeah, it was an absolute jam. So, you know what we ought to do with that, by the way, maybe for a Freedom Friday. I was thinking about this. These are fun to make. It's tough to get the description right. I keep forgetting the wording you have to use, but it's the description you have to put in
the prompt.
Thank you very much, Devin. Devin comes in with the prompt. You're right. It's hard to get the prompt right, and the artificial intelligence learns quickly. Like when I was making a couple of the songs earlier in the week, it would not use the word socialist at all. I got a couple of versions of communism Kool-Aid. That was the best one. And then when I tried again, it stopped using it. Like it learned. It's like, oh, this guy, he's trying to use communism, and it stopped using communism as well. But maybe what I need are like prompt requests of what to put in to create some. Because I thought it would be fun on a Freedom Friday to try to tailor some music on a Freedom Friday as the guests roll in. So anyway, we play those, by the way, in the run up to the show every single morning. So usually we start about 15 minutes early and run some of the parody songs before the show goes live at 6 a.m. So for you early risers out there that want to hear some more of the AI overlords, the house band here on the John Justice Show presented by American Experiment, just hop on any of the platforms early. So John Phelan here at Center of the American Experiment did this write-up recently. The Minnesota DFL claims that farmers are struggling under Trump's administration due to tariffs, which have increased the cost of equipment, fertilizer, and other supplies. However, Representative Rick Hansen, the DFL's Agriculture Committee co-chair, observed many new trucks at Farm Fest, and he suggested that farmers are doing well. They don't stand by any of their claims. This is a really, really good example of how on the left, they do not stand by that which they say that they're concerned about, say that they care about. Because there was tons of commentary from Farm Fest about how, the farmers are suffering. And there is, don't misunderstand, there is some difficulty going on. But as somebody that does this for a living, I can tell you firsthand that there has not been an abundance of stories coming out of our agriculture divisions, our farmers here in Minnesota, who have been expressing their frustration over it. I know there are difficulties out there. I get it. I'm not saying there's not. But in terms of just the major impact on our farms, there certainly has not been a major push by farmers or news media outlets to cover any of that. And I just want to stress, while there's some truth behind it, but you had Democrats during Farm Fest that just kept saying Trump's tariffs, Trump's tariffs, Trump's tariffs, hurting farmers, hurting farmers, hurting farmers. And then you get this idiot who actually is the co-chair of the DFL's Agriculture Committee. And he basically talks about, I don't know, I saw a lot of trucks in the parking lot, so I guess the farmers are doing just fine. Reminds me a bit of Representative Emma Greenman yesterday, worried about the money versus the many and the dark money, not of Republicans, but dark money going to Angie Craig's campaign in her support of the radical activist Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. So, as John Phelan writes, one of the DFL's consistent themes this election cycle has been how badly Minnesota's farmers are apparently doing under President Donald Trump's administration. He pulled a bunch of different clips here, comments from the Minnesota DFL. I mean, it's like 2 pages worth of comments from the DFL. Brad Finstead had a choice: stand with Minnesota farmers or stand with Trump's taxes on them. Guess which one he chose? Another one, Brad Finstead's answer to farmers struggling under Trump's tariff policy: take on more debt. And the list goes on and on and on. Trump has pushed farmers to the brink and our state to its limit. Hammering Brad Finstad again, sided with him instead of Minnesotans, blah, blah, blah. But then Phelan gets into how one DFLer disagrees, and that's Representative Rick Hansen, representing District 53B in southeastern Twin Cities metro area, which includes the cities of Newport, St. Paul, Inver Grove Heights, Cottage Grove, St. Paul Park, and parts of Dakota and Washington counties. It says much about how the DFL has abandoned its rural Minnesota and been abandoned by it, that the party has to make a representative from such a suburban area co-chair of the Agriculture and Finance Policy Committee. In this capacity, Representative Hansen traveled to Farm Fest and was struck by the opulence. For all the farm troubles, doing that thing with my fingers, lots of new pickup trucks at Farm Fest parking lot. Lots of American flag of new pickup trucks. Interesting. Now, you know that this is really important because Representative Rick Hansen used a whole bunch of emojis in his post. I also understand why, because Democrats often need visual aid. So in case they didn't understand what the word farm meant, he included a little tractor emoji. In case the person reading it didn't understand that the new pickups represent cash, right next to trucks, he included a little cash bag of cash emoji. And if people weren't still understanding what was going on when it comes to the new trucks, lots of new trucks, in between lots and of, he put an American flag. Because remember, if you're a Democrat, You cannot be pro-America and a patriot, and you cannot express your patriotism. If you have an American flag on your pickup truck, you are clearly a Republican, because we are a horrible, awful, systemically racist country that does not value equity whatsoever. If we want to make America great, you have to push for communism and socialism if you're on the left. They don't care. They don't care. These people are out of touch. And the larger point that John Phelan makes here is absolutely accurate. And that is, this dude is from anything but a rural area. Why is he the co-chair on the agriculture committee for the DFL? They don't have anybody in Rocks and Cows land, according to Dim Walls, who can go and take care of this job. All right, let's turn our attention over before we wrap things up today. As I mentioned, I have a Gone Green update. This is a good one, by the way, that I've been holding on to. First off, President Donald Trump has been totally vindicated. CNN recently, I believe this is Harry Enton, was forced to admit that Americans do not care about climate change.
They don't care. They don't care. I mean, just look at these numbers. Okay, top issue, a midterm vote. You can list up the 3 issues. The economy, not surprisingly, comes in at number 1 at 54%. Immigration, 28%. Look where climate change is. It's tied for 14th. Tied for 14th, all the way down here at 3%. Johnny, I'm not the greatest mathematician in the world, but I sure as heck know that 54% is a whole heck of a lot higher than 3%. So despite the climate being so warm in the month of July, the hottest month on record here in the United States of America, the voters simply put do not say that climate change is going to be an issue in which they vote upon in the midterm election.
And how much people are concerned has been changing over time.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, the other thing, which is, how much concern is there when it comes over time? And you see this 3% here, and you can see these slides right here. Say climate change is a very big problem. In 2016, it was 40%. It was 40%. Look where we are in 2026. It's 39%. It's 39%. Now, Johnny B., you're talking about change. Where the change we have seen is partisanship, right? And what we can see is Republicans, more so than anybody else, have been shifting away from the idea that climate change is a top issue for them. Take a look at this. The least important issue for Republicans, it's just at 14% in terms of saying that climate change is a very big problem. So we're seeing a large partisan split, but when it comes together, Democrats are going in one direction, Republicans are going in another direction. But when you put those two together, the bottom line is we're only talking about 2 in 5 Americans, both now and 10 years ago, saying that climate change is a very big problem.
This is
Yep, which is why the Democrats have moved on to bigger and better things. To this point, and this relates directly back to what I was just talking about in the John Phelan piece, and Democrats not caring about the issues that they say they care about. Bill Glahn, also a policy fellow here at Center of the American Experiment. Minnesota celebrated the opening of a new sustainable aviation fuel facility. Let me stop here really quick. Sustainable aviation fuel those 3 words should never be combined together. Okay, it's not sustainable. It's not what airplanes need to run on. It'll destroy our airline industry if we were to move towards sustainable aviation fuel. And make no mistake, if there were Democrat control and they pushed for a majority of the airlines to use the sustainable aviation fuel, don't think for a second that all of the Democrat electeds flying all around the world will still be using the conventional fuel because it's more cost efficient, it's more efficient, and not nearly as expensive. There's nothing sustainable about sustainable aviation fuel. That being said, the Democrats would even agree with me, and here's the reason why. So there's a new sustainable aviation fuel facility. It has support from businesses and political leaders. However, the state is simultaneously suing the refinery for climate fraud, raising the questions about the effectiveness of this approach. Bill Glahn writes, think renewable jet fuel made from agriculture products rather than crude oil. The location was the Flint Hills Pine Bend Oil Refinery in Rosemount. It brought in big names, and he quotes some pieces of this article from KARE 11. Delta Airlines put out a press release and sent a president to the event. U.S. Representative Brad Finstead was there. KARE 11 report includes a quote from Amy Klobuchar. She and Dim Walls appear to have forgotten the fact, though, that the state of Minnesota is actually suing this same refinery by name for the alleged tort of climate fraud. Notable by his apparent absence was State Attorney General Thief Ellison, who filed the lawsuit back in June of 2020 in state court in Ramsey County. The document reads like an artifact from a lost age. Over the past 6 years, the case file has accumulated 258 documents. A handful of court hearings take place every year, with 4 lawyers from the Attorney General's office actively working the case. The last hearing took place on July 2nd. Earlier this year, the state lawsuit generated a countersuit by the feds. You, the taxpayer, pay for the state's lawyers. You, the energy consumer, pay for the refinery's lawyers. How are we better off, writes Bill Glahn. The refinery is one of the state's largest employers. This pointless lawsuit must rank somewhere on the list. If you really do care about climate change, it would seem that the positive reinforcement on display last month at the ribbon-cutting ceremony would do more good than endless lawfare. They do not care about that which they say they care about. It's all about political expediency. That's it. Hypocrisy be damned. Hypocrisy, the left doesn't even know what the word means, and if they do, they simply do not care. They feel they are the righteous, they are the just, everything that they do is correct. Even when they're being hypocrites, it's done for the better good of the people. On a lighter note, this cracked me up. This was this goes back to let's see here, August 1st. So, about 2 weeks ago. Sven Sundgaard, he now works over at Bring Me the News as a meteorologist. So he has this lengthy piece here when the weather was hotter a couple of weeks ago. He says, July was brutal in Minnesota, but the numbers show how much climate change is to blame. I'm like, oh, okay. Do tell. And he writes, for the record, from record heat up north to the state's worst air quality ever, okay, the meteorologist breaks down the brutal month and says it has the fingerprints of climate change all over it. Well, the air quality came from the lunatics in Canada, and I'll get to that in just a moment because I actually have a little bit of myth busting on those wildfires. But Sven writes this: July was a hot one. Any way you slice it or dice it. In the Twin Cities, we ended up with the sixth hottest. We ended up the sixth hottest on record, which goes back to 1873. That puts us in the top 4 of our records. We landed just between July of 1916 and 2011 with the average temperature of 78.9 degrees, which was plus 4.6 degrees Fahrenheit above the 1991 to 2020 modern normal average. Some severe storms up to 4 inches of rain in the Minnesota forecast. Now, the piece continues to go on, talking about temperatures across the state, average plus 3 to plus 6 degrees Fahrenheit above normal, which is a huge amount. Quick statistical analysis shows that July temperatures have warmed 2.1 degrees over the past 50 years. It may not sound like a lot, but remember, that's most of the standard deviation increase, blah, 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 blah. He refuted his own data. So we were in the top 4, top 6. We landed between 1916 and 2011, which just goes to show that we've been this hot before. But yes, climate change is to blame, everybody. It's been happening since 1916. Oh, sure, it went down a bit, right? And then it kind of came back up, and then it got hot again, and then it went down again. But we're back there again, and it's clearly because it's climate change. It's just on a really long timeline. How do people write this and then not see that they actually refuted their own claims? I immediately noticed if you're in the top, if you're not at number 1, if it's not the hottest it's ever been, and the hottest it's ever been with a level of consistency, then how can you go and blame it on anything other than Earth cycles? Especially when you go back to say, we've been keeping records for, what was it? What did he say here? 1873? We've been keeping records? You can't make it up. You can see it for yourself over at Bring Me the News. No, it's not climate change. It's just hot like it was back in 1916 and got hot again, and it'll probably cool down. And I'm sure there will be some other leftists in whatever form of media they're using. There'll probably be those clear screens that you see in all the futuristic movies and whatnot, or the newspapers that actually have moving screens on it or whatever. And it'll be some other hack there going, you know what, boy, climate change continues. It's the warmest it's been since going back to August 1st of 2026. And it's all because of global warming. The Minnesota Reformer has another piece. I won't go through all of it. I just want to share with you the takeaway. This is the headline. We've made progress against big tobacco. We can do the same with the latest batch of bad air. He talks about his grandfather. Grandfather always told me, I don't want to go by the lungs. Those were his words for telling me he feared dying due to lung failure. I spent so much time at the hospital during his treatment and recovery from a near fatal aortic aneurysm that my parents say I learned to walk there. His aneurysm wasn't a fluke. My grandfather, the oldest of 11 in a poor Irish family, started smoking at age 7 to take the edge off his hunger. He smoked for decades. Eventually did go by the lungs 16 years after his aneurysm. The year he died, 2008, was also the year the Minnesota Pollution Air Control Agency began issuing air quality alerts. I grew up in Southern California, and before we ended up, because these were good things. These, pollution control agencies, when they came out, especially late 70s into the 80s, these were good things. I remember growing up in Southern California, we would have smog alerts. You literally had news reports, and your parents would go and tell you, get inside to get fresh air. You couldn't stay outside. You could see the haze in the air. It looks like China, essentially, if you see any images of industrial China. It's the same thing, just this brown haze hanging over everything. And you could feel it in your lungs at the time. So these were good efforts by the government to put in regulations to curb these things from happening. Then he goes and jumps the shark. He says many Minnesotans have recently experienced the worst air quality on record, and Minnesota held the status of having the worst air quality in the world. Without change, we will continue to experience poor air quality due to wildfire smoke that has linked to hotter, drier summers that turn forests into kindling. Cleaner energy mandates, lawsuits against the oil companies, and financial investments in new technologies are critical tools for mitigating climate change. He's blaming this on climate change. Those stopping progress, like refusing to provide federal permits on wind farm projects, are delaying this shift, driving up the hospital admission rates and costing lives. And then he goes to make the comparison that tobacco companies were once seen invincible. Change didn't happen all at once. Public policy shifted gradually with lawsuits, higher taxes, and restrictions on smoking in public buildings, while culture also changed. We face the same daunting policy and cultural challenge when it comes to climate change. We must accept the grim reality of climate change and choose to honor each small action we take to address it. We did something similar about the scourge of tobacco when we can do something about the once inconceivable event of wildfire smoke rolling in every summer. It is so incredibly arrogant to believe that we would actually be able and capable to have technology to lower the temperature of the planet. This article is an example of the lengths that these climate change fear-mongerers have to go through to push their narratives. It's got nothing to do with climate change. It has everything to do with the Canadian government and the Canadian wildfire officials not doing what is necessary to clear the brush so we don't experience this every year. If there is any culprit of climate change, it's the fact that too many people believe in climate change, and it's causing us to get choked out every summer because the idiots to our north are driving their policy based off of false climate change narratives. And don't just take my word for it. I'm looking at an article right here from the City Journal. More than 100 million Americans were under air quality alerts, smoke reaching Washington, D.C. Over 100 were burning in northwestern Ontario alone of the 900 wildfires that were burning during the time when this piece was written. Nearly 80 large fires, uncontained nationwide, and 3.9 million acres have burned this year. When wildfire smoke blankets America's largest cities, as it has several times in recent years, people look for scapegoats. Climate change is a reflective answer. President Trump has a different culprit. He blamed Canada's willful negligence in failing to manage its forest and threatened to add the smoke's incalculable costs to the tariffs that Canada already pays. And he says, now both diagnoses are incomplete. Fire needs fuel, and a century of aggressive suppression combined with too little thinning and prescribed burning has allowed deadwood and dense undergrowth to pile up across North American forests. The large negligence broadly applies to both sides of the border. Governments in both countries have had to spend heavily fighting fires after they start while neglecting the work that would have made them less severe. The severity of the fire ultimately depends on how the landscapes are managed. Targeted fuels treatment, including forest thinning, brush clearance, prescribed burning, removes the dense vegetation that causes the wildfire to spread and intensity. These treatments don't necessarily keep fires from starting, but they reduce the intensity. They restore more natural forest conditions and give firefighters a better chance to contain the blazes once they break out. Canada has done far too little of this. The New York Times reported that in 2023, approvals for prescribed burns were so slow and burdensome to obtain that the provinces managed to do only a handful of controlled burns every year, and little has changed since 2023. An area barely larger than Manhattan, according to the recent Canadian Senate report. Prescribed burns treated only about 700 of these hectaacres nationwide. And again, it's barely an area larger than Manhattan. The United States, by contrast, treats millions of acres with prescribed fire each year. Florida alone burns more than 2 million acres annually. Canada has begun to recognize the problem, yet responsibility remains fragmented. Provinces and territories managed fires, but Ottawa supplies funding, science, and emergency coordination. The Canadian Senate report found that no single authority is responsible for the national wildfire preparedness. Everyone owns a piece of the problem, and no one owns the outcome. And that system tends to mobilize after a disaster is already underway. Countries know how to make fires smaller and less severe. The question is, how many more suffocating summers will it take before governments figure out that managing forests is better and cheaper than watching them burn? Now, listen, I hope you stuck around for this and are about ready to close out the show, because it's incredibly relevant to the other piece that I just read. Because what was the solution presented in the Minnesota Reformer here locally to this? Fighting those individuals pushing back on climate change, as if climate change deniers in their eyes are the ones that are responsible for us having to get choked out every single year because of the Canadian wildfires. This article from the City Journal, and if you have a chance to go and read it for yourself, I would encourage you to do so, Why America Keeps Choking on Wildfire Smoke. It explains why it is a complicated process and a complicated issue, of which there are multiple solutions. But the one takeaway clearly is that the solution proposed in that editorial that people read and buy into because they don't bother going and searching for the truth like I did for your edification on this show, people read that and they believe it. They think, well, you know what? We wouldn't have these wildfires. I mean, that's the takeaway for somebody on the left who is dumb enough to take that article at face value. It would be that, well, you know what? Maybe we wouldn't get choked out by these wildfires in Canada every year if the evil Republicans would just hop on board with global warming and climate change and build more windmills and solar panels. Then we wouldn't have this problem. That was the takeaway from that ridiculous piece. And I'm sure that that person who wrote it got applauded for it. Thank you so much for hanging out on the show this morning. I'll hang on to the comments that rolled into the blaster line during this final segment here on the John Justice Show. If you missed any portion of today's show, be sure to go and check out the podcast. It'll be available shortly up on the Mixlr app. So go ahead and download that if you haven't done so already. Also, wherever you go and listen to podcasts, if you want to watch a replay of the show, you can do so up on Facebook and on YouTube and Rumble, Center of the American Experiment. In studio tomorrow, we have a wild card, Katherine Johnson from Center of the American Experiment, Representative Max Reimer, and of course, A.K. Kamara, all on the comfy chairs and sofa of the American Experiment studio. And I look forward to talking to you on a Freedom Friday tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Enjoy the remainder of your Thursday. Thanks for spending time with us today. Remember to go and support the show at americanexperiment.org. Click on my page and you'll find out how at the bottom of the page. And if you're interested in advertising here on the John Justice Show, just like Minileaf, MINNELEAF.com, go and grab the night gummies and get yourself a good night's sleep at minileaf.com. And also NutraWave at NutraWave.us. If you're interested in advertising on the show, drop me an email, john.justice@americanexperiment.org. God bless, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow morning. Bye.
Static waves at dawn, a voice that lingers when night is gone. Twin cities hum with stories spun. John Justice rides the rising sun.